Chapter 2107. The 8 half-immortals flew towards the stars that they had chosen earlier. They were not far away from each other. This was their plan. When a cultivator reached the stage of yuanying, they would be able to influence the 5 elements of a small star. Of course, they would need to rely on other things, such as tools, treasures, special circumstances, and sudden changes in the environment. When one became a true monarch, if one had enough Tao state power, it would not be a problem for them to operate and harmonize the yin-yang spiritual meridians of a domain. Of course, it also had a lot to do with the size of the celestial body. For example, there was no need to even think about those super large domains, such as the 5 rings of heaven. A small realm like the Green Mountains was deeply transformed by spiritual vigor under the control of the demi-immortals. Especially when 8 demi-immortals worked together, the success rate of the transformation was quite high. On this point, Marching Monk and the others were not just talking nonsense. One day later, the half-immortals were in their respective positions. They didn't hesitate and prepare to start. They had already done their research on this long ago, so they didn't do it on a whim. They had a clear understanding of the operating characteristics of the yin-yang and the 5 elements in these 9 realms. This was the basic cautious attitude of a cultivator. And the yin-yang and the 5 elements were the necessary path for a great cultivator. You don't have to use it as the cornerstone of your path, but you must master it skillfully. Otherwise, you won't even understand how to use it. First, they established a connection. They controlled the star to move towards Green Hill and achieved harmony with the Green Hill's spiritual pulse. Then, the 8 of them connected with each other and formed a huge network. They merged the 9 stars that were originally one in the ancient times. This was not a physical connection, but a connection in the yin-yang 5 elements Tao state. After the whole network was running well, they injected new spiritual pulse into Green Hill through the complicated changes of the yin-yang 5 elements. This would change the intensity of the spiritual pulse of Green Hill for a period of time. In theory, if this kind of transmission formation could exist forever, then the nature of Green Mountain's spiritual vigor could really be fundamentally changed. However, the half-immortals came here with a purpose. Of course, they would not stay here forever for the sake of love's spiritual vigor. They had to grasp the time and let Green Mountain's spiritual vigor grow safely for 1 or 2,000 years. This was the most labor-saving and economical method. As for the change of the era, everything was unknown. Who would do useless work for such an irresistible will of heaven? The 8 half-immortals each immersed themselves in controlling the 5 elements and yin-yang. Under their control, the 5 elements' characteristics began to touch Qingxiu. This was a process that could not be rushed. Lu Xiaoyi was melancholy for a long time. He also rose into the air and silently observed the 5 elements, yin and yang, the spiritual veins, the earth structure, and the direction of the mountains and rivers. This time, he did not just skimp on it, but went deep into it, making sure that he did not miss any detail. Because this place was about to become their battlefield. The half-immortals' response had already transcended the level of verbal abuse, ruthless curses, and vulgar words. Everything was tacitly understood, and no one would easily concede. With the Green Hill as the foundation, this was the focus of their competition. The Marching Monk and the others wanted to change their spirits, but he wanted to maintain his original appearance. This was the essence of the contradiction. He couldn't just walk away like this. He knew this, and so did Marching Monk and the others. It was impossible for him to sit by and do nothing. Therefore, Marching Monk and the others left him a position in Qingxiu. It was not that the Green Mountains were not important, but they were very important, because this was the place where the change would take place. Since Marching Monk and the others had the advantage in numbers, the geographical advantage should be given to Lu Xiaoyi. Regardless of whether the compensation was equal or not, at least it was the principle of the cultivators. We came early, we had more people, we had a plan, and we were doing a good thing. Therefore, the 8 stars worked together. If you want to stop us, then fight against us on the Green Hills. Let's see if we are more powerful, or if you, Lu, are better at playing sh*t. This kind of struggle involved the release and rejection of the five elements and yin and yang of the entire celestial body. The 9 celestial bodies were activated together in a true stalemate. Even a cultivator would not be able to casually escape. Everyone understood the risks involved. If this shit stick Lou wanted to interfere, he had to think clearly about the possible consequences. This was a trap, an obvious trap. In fact, Marching Monk and the others did not have a better way. The simplest way was to destroy people. This method was simple, crude, and effective, but it depended on who was the right one. It was difficult to be effective against this sh*t stirrer. His strength was profound. He could escape without a trace, and he also had the eye of heaven. Even if 8 people surrounded him, the possibility of success was not high. They also had to consider if this guy did not leave. When the 8 of them each occupied a star, they could attack them one by one. As long as 2 or 3 of them were killed, the Green Mountains would not be able to continue. It was because of such concerns that it was better to control the disagreement in a star field. This way, at least they would not fall out with each other openly and maintain the face of the half-immortals. For Lu Xiaoyi, he did not have a good countermeasure. Waiting for the 8 of them to occupy a star and attacking with his sword was the simplest way. But there were great consequences to doing this. First, they did not do anything wrong. They were doing a good thing. If you kill them with your sword, you would be going against the laws of heaven. Second, if you really killed them, it might not solve the problem. Would the remaining people just let it go and leave? So he accepted the challenge of the Marching Monk because everyone agreed on this way of fighting. If he won, these people would stop talking nonsense and never lay a finger on the Green Mountains. If he lost, then there was nothing to say. He was lucky to be alive. The future of the Green Mountains would have nothing to do with him. The only condition was that the Marching Monk agreed to. Even an ant would not die because of this. Of course, this was an exaggeration, but the meaning was also very clear. They could not cause misery and suffering to people. Even more so, they could not let a single human die. This was the final result of his negotiation with the half-immortals. There was no need to say anything. With just a few words, the attitude of both sides was set, and this was the basis for their actions. They were all great cultivators. At this level, there was no need for them to swear an oath. So, in order to deal with the Marching Monk's spiritual opportunity, he had to know everything about the Green Mountains like the back of his hand. Only then could he effectively stop them. These people had been in the Green Mountains for a much longer time than him. It was possible that they had set up a trap here. It would only be effective at the critical moment, and he had to find out these ambushes in a very short time. Otherwise, he would be in danger of failure, and he would be irresponsible for his own life. After scanning the whole area from the sky with his divine sense, he did not find anything special. This was expected. His opponents were also at the half-immortal level. They were not so superficial. So, he landed and burrowed into the ground. His divine sense began to search in the earth's crust. The deeper he went, the farther he went. When his spiritual power spread out, it was like a sophisticated radar, scanning any suspicious places. He did not have much time. The Marching Monks group would only need a few days to complete their preparations. It would not be too long. Chapter 2108. A few days later, one after another, disturbances of the Tau state come from outer space and begin to connect with the Green Mountains world. Their strength is different, their Tau state is different, and their distance is different. The 8 stars and the Green Mountains are not connected at the same time. Some are early and some are late. In this regard, Lu Xiaoyi, who was hiding in the source of the Green Mountains spirit vein, had the most direct feeling. He had many choices on how to resist. For example, he could stop every tentacle that stretched over, keep an eye on a certain tentacle, and only stop a few tentacles and give up most of them. These were all methods. But in practice, he found that his situation was getting worse. In theory, he was in the Green Mountains' main star. Because of the convenient geographical location, he could mobilize the changes of the 5 elements and yin and yang of the Green Mountains to the greatest extent. However, other half-immortals could hardly compare with him in the Tau state because of the distance. If there were no more than 3 opponents, he could resist all of them. But if there were more than 3 opponents, he couldn't deal with them. Lu Xiaoyi was proficient in the 5 elements and yin and yang. Even if others were not as good as him, the advantage in numbers would make him struggle. This was not a battle where he could concentrate on dealing with one opponent first and then defeat them one by one. In such a confrontation, his opponents were always 8 people, and there would be no shortage of them. Now, there were only 5 or 6 half-immortals stretching their tentacles. Once 8 of them launched their tentacles together, they would inevitably ignore their own safety. He would face 8 ideas and 8 strategies at the same time, and all of them were in the same realm as him. To be honest, he would rather be besieged by these 8 people in the void of the universe than be outnumbered forever like now. There was another problem. The spiritual opportunity compensation for the Green Mountains didn't necessarily require the cooperation of 8 stars. In fact, 4 or 5 stars were enough. In the words of the marching monk, reaching the lower limit of the spiritual opportunity intensity of the upper-class cultivation world was very likely to reach the top-class spiritual opportunity intensity. This was what he meant. 4 or 5 stars could basically reach the upper-class level. 8 stars together could possibly reach the top-class level. What the result was, it all depended on Lu Xiaoyi's ability. How many people could he stop? This was very difficult for him, because blocking 2 or 3 people wouldn't solve the problem at all. However, if he had to block 6 or 7 people at the same time, this was clearly beyond his ability. The marching monks had done their research on the swordsman. They knew that once a swordsman fought in the void, he would not care about the number of people around him. This was because he could focus all his energy on one person and rely on teleportation to find an opening. They did not have a good way to control him. However, the current method was very suitable. Trapped at 1 star, Lu Xiaoyi's advantage in speed had been nullified. In a clash of Tao realms, he could not defeat them one by one. Under the pressure of 8 people, it was only a matter of time before he could not hold on. The trap of the Green Mountains world was premeditated for him. Of course, in order to ensure that the swordsman would be able to jump in, they had to pay a price as well. If they failed, they would leave immediately. They knew that if they wanted to disperse the swordsman without disturbing the lives of the Green Mountains people, the swordsman could only accept their challenge. The marching monk was the only one who had such a deep understanding of the swordsman and set up a trap so that Lu Xiaoyi had to jump in. What a headache! Lu Xiaoyi suddenly found that there seemed to be only one way left for him. Shrink the defense, let go of the periphery, and let the tentacles of the 8 people reach out, and then seek a chance to turn the tables in the overall confrontation. However, this was also a trap. In this way, Lu Xiaoyi was forced to take the road of Mount Hua. At that time, it would be difficult for him to escape from the overall confrontation. It was not that he could not escape, but as long as he escaped, the mortals of the Green Mountains would suffer. It meant that he would not only lose the game, but also lose his face and break his promise. The marching monk had expected that with his character, he would never give up halfway, let alone leave in fear of difficulties. He could only fight to the death. The original battle of Tao Realm Spiritium had become a dead end. If he left, his reputation would be ruined, and he would be entangled with the fruit of sin. If he stayed, he would die, and his Tao would disappear, and he would be reincarnated. No matter which one it was, it did not seem to be good for him. The marching monk was indeed amazing. He could set up a perfect killing trap in a hurry, and even made him take the initiative to jump in. Even as an opponent, he could not help but applaud. Having an opponent like this was the real life of a cultivator. He followed, not only for the sake of the Crow ancestor, but also for his own ideals. Of course, he also had his trump card. The end of the era was near. He could not afford to lose, nor could he hide. The only choice was to face the difficulties head-on. Up until now, he had really forced himself to the point where he needed to cut through everything. He was still controlling the 5 elements and yin-yang, fighting and retreating at the same time. He would not let go of any tentacles that reached out to him. This was not useless, but he needed to know the cultivation of each of the 8 demi-immortals, their abilities, habits, operating methods, and the direction they leaned towards. Only then could he deal with them when needed. The Tau realm would not be fake. As long as there was a collision, he would definitely understand. Under this kind of intense attack and defense, one after another, you advance, and I retreat. Under the repeated attacks, Lu Xiaoyi's Tau realm defensive power began to shrink. After a few more days, the 8 tentacles of the other party had all gathered, and they began their second step, which was to link up with each other. Lu Xiaoyi's advantage was that he was on his own planet and had the support of the Green Hill spiritual pulse. If they wanted to pass through the Green Hill spiritual pulse's intensity, they would not be able to bypass him. The marching monks' difficulty was that they needed to transmit their Tau realm energy from far away across the void from other planets. This made them feel that they were too far away to reach. Therefore, they had to link up with each other to form a combined force. Only then could they truly form a crushing force against Lu Xiaoyi. The main focus of Lu Xiaoyi's defense was no longer on blocking a single tentacle, but on the connection between them. Through the fine-tuning of the Tau state, the 8 tentacles could not be connected into a net at all. This process was a competition of the micro-control of the 5 elements, yin and yang. It was a competition of whose foundation was deeper. There was no room for ambiguity. This was the true power of the Tau realm. The Tau realm of the 5 elements was actually the innate Tao that Lu Xiaoyi had the deepest and longest immersion in. Since Jindan, he had already put in a lot of effort in this aspect. Now, even he did not know what level his 5 elements had reached. In any case, he was confident that once the Tau realm of the 5 elements collapsed, he would not even need the 5 element fragments and would immediately obtain the qualifications to fuse the 5 elements. Yin and Yang was the Tao that he had been studying recently. He had not done any special research before, but the connection between Yin and Yang and the 5 elements was too deep. It was like they were 2 sides of the same coin. He had a strong foundation in the 5 elements. Naturally, his progress in the Tao of Yin and Yang had improved by leaps and bounds. It was because of his deep attainments in the Tao of Yin and Yang that he had the confidence to step into this pit. For example, right now, the marching monks network was messed up by him. No matter what, they could not form a combined force. Chapter 2109. The situation was in a stalemate, which was advantageous to Lu Xiaoyi. The marching monk's plan was on point, but now he encountered a problem, which was that he did not have enough judgment on the swordsman's ability of 5 elements and yin-yang. He had fought with this guy before, and he had a feeling that this guy knew a lot about Tao realms, especially about the Void Tao realm. He was also very familiar with Buddhism, such as merit, impermanence, slaughter, void, fate, and so on. In terms of practical Tao realms, he seemed to know a lot about the 5 ties, but he found a little secret of this swordsman, which was that he was familiar with all the collapsed Tao, which was probably his final direction. Such an ability was incredible, but it was inseparable from the Tao fragments, so he must have his own unique way to obtain the fragments. The 5 elements and yin-yang had not collapsed, and no fragments had fallen, so he thought that Lu Xiaoyi's ability of 5 elements and yin-yang was not enough, which was also the basic judgment of this plan. Now it seemed that there was a mistake. This thing was like a treasure chest of Tao, as if there was nothing he could not do. But it did not matter, he still had a trick up his sleeve. No matter how high the Tao state ability of this person was, the final outcome would be determined by the depth of the foundation. The 8 of them together could crush him. There was no reason for them to fail, but the premise was that they must unite. Since they could not cooperate on the Green Hill, they would start to cooperate outside the planet, and then press forward. It might be a little troublesome, but it would ensure success. After sending out the signal, they continued to maintain pressure on the Green Hill, but the 8 of them separated and gathered on a meteorite outside the Green Hill, which would take time. The marching monk tried to control the force of the 8 of them, in case they used too much force and scared the swordsman away, giving up on this fight and looking for other ways to fight with them. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity from the bottom of his heart, he still wanted to destroy this swordsman. Whether it was the destruction of humanity or the destruction of spiritual will, this person was too unfriendly to him. He had his own difficulties. The most difficult thing was that the 8 people were not completely united. The established alliance was relatively weak. This came from the fact that there were 5 Taoists and only 3 monks. Although he had tried his best to maintain the alliance in the Green Mountains over the years, it was still difficult for them to be united. This situation was not obvious now, but it would be fatal when it was urgent. Most importantly, he wasn't the one with the highest yin and yang abilities among the 8 of them. It was another Taoist. It was hard to say if she would listen to him at a critical moment. Even with Lu Xiaoyi's ability, it was hard to say that he could command hundreds of people in the half-immortal realm with a single call, let alone him. Cultivators were originally a profession with an extremely high degree of autonomy. The higher one's realm was, the more this was the case. They didn't have the discipline of the mortal world's army. They advocated individual freedom and lacked obedience. He was still hesitating. When the tentacles of the 8 people were united, would it be him or the Taoist with the highest 5 elements ability who would be the one in control? Everyone had their own difficulties, and everyone was different. They could only take it one step at a time. How could there be a surefire death trap in this world? Green Mountains region, Tianya City. The Taoist palace was full of people. The cultivators of the Green Mountains who participated in the Taoist meeting did not leave. They wanted to witness this historic moment, but they lacked awareness of the invisible and intangible confrontation of the Tao state. Except for a few old babies who had a clear feeling, the rest, whether they were Zhuji or Jindan, were at a loss. They didn't know how far the change of the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth had progressed. However, those who liked to delve into the science of cultivation naturally had their own methods. There were several Jindan stage cultivators who did it on the spot. They separately used their transcendence energy to form a golden spear, a wooden spike, a water screen, a flame, an earthen wall, a Chongyang bird, and an Yin butterfly. These magic objects created by mana were no longer stable since a few days ago. They changed dramatically from weak to strong. One moment, the flame rose high. The next moment, the wooden thorn grew crazily. The next moment, the water rippled. And the next moment, the earth wall collapsed. Even the Jin Dan couldn't control these changes, let alone stabilize them if they wanted to. From this, one could guess the extremely intense changes of yin, yang, and 5 elements in the Green Mountains world. Even if none of them could understand the true meaning of it, they intuitively felt that something was wrong. Shouldn't the transfer of spiritual opportunity be like a gentle breeze and drizzle with subtle influence? Why does it seem to be a battle with a magic deduction now? Uneasiness spread and affected everyone. While looking forward to the beautiful future, they also began to worry about what price the Green Mountains would have to pay. In the face of reality beyond their understanding, careful thinking returned to their bodies. Some cultivators began to ask questions. Shanshin promised a lot of benefits, but why did he say nothing about the disadvantages? In the world of cultivation, regardless of the level, everyone understood that there was no perfection. There was no perfection. If this simple truth was as true as it had always been for millions of years, then where was the opposite of perfection? Everyone was thinking about this problem, but no one had a conclusion. Because their information was limited, they could only see within the bounded domain, but they couldn't find the changes outside the universe. Until today, Bai Shaoshi summoned up his courage and came to a group of worried Yuanying Jindan. What imperfections will there be? I may know something. Everyone looked at him. Olding didn't take it seriously. At least the current atmosphere of the Green Mountains had not changed. You can speak frankly. Don't worry. Now that Bai Shaoshi had spoken, he was completely relaxed. The Shanshin who explained shit, urine, and fart came to the Green Mountains for more than a month. I received him. He had a good temper and was approachable. I got along well with him. My suggestion that all pedestrians should walk on the right side in the Taoist palace was actually a reminder from this Shanshin. After the Taoist meeting was over, I talked with him for a while. Since he didn't mind, I said a few more words. I repeated everything without any changes. The Shangxian cloud. The general trend of the universe is changing. The era is about to restart. The celestial phenomenon of the void is unstable, and chaotic phenomena are everywhere. It is really unwise to change spirits at this time. The benefits will only last for a few thousand years, but the disadvantages may last forever. If the universe is really changing, forcefully violating the law of nature like the Green Mountains will cause the spirit to go back to before. In the worst case, the spirit will be lost completely and become a common star. Therefore, he thought that this was an ulterior motive of other half-immortals to achieve their goal. The goal was the dreamland, and improving the spirit was just a means. But they didn't really think about the Green Mountains world. Everyone was dumbfounded. Jean Dan asked, "Why didn't Shangxian say this in front of us? Is it because you can't? Or you don't want to? Or is it just a guess?" Bai Xiaoshu replied, "The Shangxian cloud. Under longevity, there is no reason. It's useless to persuade them. They are just evil and annoying." Chapter 21:10. In the Tinya Taoist palace, everyone's face was ugly. They looked at the Yuanying ancestors. Only they had the ability to go out of the void of the universe. However, the ancestors were also embarrassed. They could go out, but they couldn't go far. Moreover, the airspace of the Green Mountains world was relatively remote, and there were no neighboring human self-cultivation regions. There were a few, but they were not as good as the Green Mountains. Usually, the most common thing that passed by here was the void beast. They didn't like to go to other regions, and they didn't have a common language with human beings. They didn't have the strength to travel far into the void, so they were very isolated in terms of information. In the history of self-cultivation of the Green Mountains, there were some brave Yuanying who traveled alone, but they never came back. An old nascent soul smiled bitterly. I did hear someone mention it in a chance encounter in outer space hundreds of years ago, but it was vague and ambiguous. The change of epochs in the universe is like the arrival of a wolf. We have been on guard for tens of thousands of years, but the universe is still the same, isn't it? But since it was mentioned by the immortals, there may be a certain possibility? Bai Xiaoshu also knew that what he said might have a far-reaching impact on the Green Mountains, so he also expressed his own judgment. "I have been with this immortal for more than a month. In my opinion, he may be a little out of place with the other 8 immortals." The subtext of what he said was that they didn't get along well, so it might be a kind of slander, a rumor, but this couldn't be said clearly. They could only judge the matter as it was, and the rest would be left to the elders to judge. The Green Mountains was everyone's home, and everyone wanted it to become better, but now there was a fork in the road. Become better? Don't change? Become worse? No one could make up their minds. After discussing and discussing, it was still a mess. It was still the same old problem, not enough information. So everyone voted, and the result came out quickly. The majority of the cultivators were still in favor of improving the environment of spiritual vigor. Under the incomparably beautiful future, it was acceptable to take appropriate risks. This was the gambling nature of humans. Mortals were like this, and even more so for cultivators. The only difference was that unlike the previous vote, there were objections this time. Although it was less than 10%, it was a dangerous start. Bai Xiaoshu didn't know that the reason why Immortal Lu talked to a Foundation establishment cultivator like him was to tell him about the dangers of the Green Mountains. Otherwise, there was no need for him to talk to a Foundation establishment cultivator about these issues that he couldn't understand. This was the art of human relations and the art of conversation. Revealing information was also very particular. If you tell them the truth, it will cause the people of Qing Xiu to be rebellious. You might as well reveal these things through a third party when they feel that things are not going well. Being ambiguous and secretive will only arouse the suspicion of others. Humans are always like this. You can't chase them away, but you can only drag them back. He didn't believe what he was told clearly, but he liked to listen to the so-called gossip, the inside story, just like how ordinary people like to look for faux prescriptions when they saw a doctor. This was a precaution. The meaning behind this was very deep. After Military Monk and the others revealed their purpose at the Taoist meeting, their battle had already begun. The layout was gradually unfolding. This was a battle that belonged to the demi-immortals. Lu Xiaoyi had already realized what Military Monk and the others wanted to do. In fact, these methods were not very impressive for the demi-immortals. If they couldn't establish a network in Green Mountains, they could establish a network in advance. Anyway, they had to establish a network. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to achieve their goal. But even if he knew, it was too far away to stop them. He still had to deal with the pressure of 8 people here, so it was difficult for him to divide his strength to look for them in outer space. If he really did find them, he would be in the same situation as these demi-immortals. Without the convenience of guarding their own planet, it would be superfluous to be besieged by 8 people. He was just delaying it, but he knew that it was impossible to completely stop them. This was the situation chosen by Military Monk, so he couldn't take advantage of it. While waiting, the 8-man alliance formed a net of Tau State in outer space and approached Green Mountains. Here, they would fight a decisive battle. The goal of the decisive battle was to see who could control the 5 elements and yin and yang of Green Mountains. If Lu Xiaoyi could resist, they would never be able to transfer the spiritual opportunity to Green Mountains. If Lu Xiaoyi couldn't resist, everything would be over. This was his last chance to retreat. If he retreated now, at least the creatures of Green Mountains wouldn't be affected. If he retreated now, he would have to pay a high price when he collided with the 8 people with the power of Green Mountain's 5 elements. He didn't retreat. On another planet not far away, Military Monk smiled cruelly. He knew that swordsmen wouldn't give up until they saw the coffin. This was his real goal. Compared to the Dreamlands, he valued this guy's bad luck more. Senior Brother Li Fong, I'll leave the rest to you. If you need any help, just tell us, and we'll help you. In the end, the marching monk chose to believe in his professionalism. This was a demeanor that a half-immortal must have. Otherwise, as soon as he took full control of the situation, he would immediately offend Taoist Fong Liang. What good would come out of that if a rift were to form between them? Taoist Li Fong responded with his spiritual awareness. I won't let you down. Let me see how powerful the swordsman's 5 elements and yin and yang can be. At this moment, all the creatures of Green Mountains could feel it. Mortals only felt their hearts throbbing inexplicably. However, the marks of spells in the Taoist palace of Taya City disappeared in an instant. They couldn't cast spells again. From now on, the 5 elements and yin and yang of Green Mountains lost their original order under the strong interference of the outside world. Lu Xiaoyi had been prepared for this. If the other party suppressed him with force, he would move around. If the other party fought with strength, he would compete with skills. The competition of the Tau State was very important in force, but understanding was also important. He would just take it as reviewing the Tau State of 5 elements. To be honest, he hadn't used the 5 elements in practice for a long time, so he was a little rusty. From this day on, many strange phenomena began to appear in the Green Mountains world. For example, the river flowed backward, the reversal of dawn and dusk, the disorderly growth of plants, the inexplicable gathering of animals, and so on. But fortunately, no serious consequences were caused. At this point, both sides were strictly restricting their manipulation of the Tau State. In the void of the universe, there was only one result of such a collision in the end. The sky would collapse and the earth would crack. But in the Green Mountains world, because there were human beings living there, it became a red line that no one dared to cross. Only the restraint related to one's own karma was the best restraint. From this point of view, both sides showed the bearing of a half-immortal, which was also a good way. Lu Xiaoyi won because he was backed by the Green Mountains world, so he could directly mobilize all the power of the 5 elements in the Green Mountains. Marching Monk won because they had more people and their Tau State was powerful. Because his understanding of the Tau State of 5 elements was better, Lu Xiaoyi didn't fall into a disadvantage for the time being. However, after many attempts, Taoist Li Fong knew that his understanding of the Tau State was not good enough, so he no longer used tricks. Instead, he simply used it. This was a very specific strategy. The two sides were in a stalemate for a while, and no one could do anything to the other. Chapter 2111. The battle was in a stalemate, but Lu Xiaoyi was not in a hurry. With the bounded domain behind him, he was better than his opponent in terms of endurance, because his opponent's Dao had to cross the void, which meant that the 9 stars were relatively close to each other. If they were far away, he wouldn't even need to do anything. The consumption of this distance could exhaust his opponent to death. He was not in a hurry, but Marching Monk was. If the battle became a protracted war of attrition, they would be at a disadvantage. In this battle, many factors were reversed. The swordsmen wanted to waste time, the swordsmen wanted to be fast, the swordsmen wanted to defend, and the swordsmen wanted to attack. In this case, can we activate the arrangements we left in the Green Mountains world? Marching Monk suggested. He was afraid that Fong Fong would delay the battle for the sake of his face. Fong Fong was unwilling, but the Tao state was not something that could be changed. It was not something that could be changed by clenching one's teeth. Well, we'll do as you say. But with the swordsman's perception of the 5 elements, I'm afraid that your arrangements will be useless. Marching Monk replied, since we have already arranged everything, we have to give it a try. What if the swordsman is careless? So he took action personally and activated the tactical devices buried in the Green Mountains world one by one. When they set up these ambushes, they didn't know that Lu Xiaoyi was coming. First, to save time and effort, and second, just in case they didn't do their best to cover up. Under the activation of divine thoughts, as Fong Fong said, none of the more than a dozen secret arrangements were successful. They must have been destroyed by the swordsman. This swordsman's cautiousness was not like a swordsman's. The real reason for the problem was that they had underestimated the swordsman's Tao state of the 5 elements, which brought a great obstacle to the next plan. Marching Monk went through all the plans in his mind and felt a little regretful. After knowing that the swordsman was coming, they were in a hurry and could not do much. Everything was under the swordsman's eyes. Otherwise, he would have arranged everything more securely. But even so, he had his own trump card. Brother Fong Fong, if we use all our strength now, do you think we can completely suppress him? Fong Fong said firmly. Of course. We haven't used our full strength, and neither has he. Everyone is holding back. This is the norm in the world of cultivation. But if we all go all out, there are 8 of us, and the increase in absolute increment is not something that could be offset by him alone. It would definitely suppress him and make him run for his life. But I'm not sure how long it will take to achieve the desired effect. Of course, it would be best if the other party collapsed. However, if he could still struggle at death's door, he was afraid that there would be other external reasons. From the looks of it, this swordsman's greatest asset is his mastery of the 5 elements and yin and yang. But who knows if he has any other tricks up his sleeve? The Marching Monk made his decision. Understood. It was to establish an overwhelming advantage and not give him any room to think. In this case, I will inform the other fellow Taoists to work together and launch the arrangement on the Green Hill at the same time. We will attack him from both sides and make him collapse instantly. Run or die. Fong Chong was very curious. Master, haven't your arrangements been proven to be ineffective? There's more? How do you know that the others are still useful? The Marching Monk didn't try to hide it any longer. Haha, even if we can't hide the formation artifact from him, what if it's set up by humans? How can he identify it? Daoist Fong Chong was startled and immediately understood. It was not the 8 of them who went to set it up. That would violate the rules and promise. Then, who else could set it up? It seemed that no one else could do it except for the cultivators of the Green Hill sect. The arrangement was actually very simple. Some formation plates at specific key positions would be set up by the cultivators of the Green Hill sect. He would also go all out here. Everything was set. Master, you're so scheming. Even I was kept in the dark. The Marching Monk comforted him. In fact, we arranged these arrangements because we didn't have enough manpower, so we set up some tricks. We didn't deliberately target anyone. It was fellow Taoist Huang's suggestion. Brother Fong Chong. Remember, The formation plate is not special. It's just that it's more direct. It's the 72 earthly demons spirit surge formation. Its specialty is that it can instantly trigger the internal spiritual vein source of the Green Hill sect. It's beneficial for us to integrate with the spiritual vein of the Green Hill sect. As long as we integrate, the swordsman won't be able to break free no matter how powerful he is. As for how to integrate, Brother Fong Chong is an expert. I won't say much, but brother, listen to me. The swordsman is vengeful and ruthless. If you let him go today, there will be endless troubles in the future. You and I will definitely suffer from his tragic revenge. So, the process is almost certain. But the key is the attitude. Don't be soft-hearted and plant the root of disaster for your family in the future. Fong Chong understood. Among these people, the marching monk had the most karma with the swordsman. In fact, the 7 of them met each other for the first time. There was no hatred between them. At most, they just didn't like each other because of different ideas. There was no reason to kill the opponent. Moreover, with the ability of the swordsman and his great reputation in the world of cultivation in the universe, who would want to provoke him easily if they didn't have a deadly enemy like the marching monk? Once he escaped, he would plant karma and there would be no peace in the future. The marching monk told him this to encourage him to kill him. He couldn't be indecisive. If he showed mercy, they would be the unlucky ones. Fong Chong wouldn't agree so easily just because of the marching monk's suggestion. He had his own judgment. First of all, I want to be at the front of the dream-seeking sequence. Otherwise, there's no need for me to take this risk. Secondly, I want to know the attitude of the others. We can't just be the 2 of us doing the work while the others watch from the back and run away when things go wrong. The marching monk agreed. All right, the dream-seeking sequence will be based on the amount of work done. I'll be the last. Brother Fong Chong, who contributed the most, will be the first. I'll contact the others now. If it's the majority's opinion, what will Brother Fong Chong say? Fong Chong didn't hesitate. If it's the consensus of the majority, then I'll follow suit. The marching monk said firmly, all right, it's a deal. He immediately contacted the other 6 people. Because their Tao realms were connected, they became one. Thus, there was no distance barrier in communication. Everyone expressed their opinions one by one. The marching monk, Taoist Wang, and the other 2 monks all agreed to eliminate the swordsman. Half of them had passed. Fong Chong joined in. The remaining 2 half-immortals had no other choice. So the matter was settled. The marching monk made the arrangement. I'll send a signal to organize the 72 earth-killing spirit surging matrix in the Green Mountains world. After the preparation, listen to my signal. Everyone will work together and reach the maximum limit of the Tao realm in an instant. Fellow Taoist Fong Chong will be in charge of the overall control. At the same time, I'll activate the matrix to respond. We'll work together from the inside and the outside. We'll try our best not to give the swordsman a chance to react and struggle. I'll say one more thing. The swordsman is not only vicious, but also has the fastest reaction in the world of cultivation. So we can't hide anything. If everyone works together and cooperates perfectly, he won't have a chance when the pressure is suddenly reduced. Even whether he can escape or not depends on us. However, since we've already done it, we can't let him escape. Once and for all, in the swordsman's words, only a deadly opponent is a good opponent. I hope he is a good opponent. I don't want us to be good opponents. Chapter 21:12. In the Tinya city of the Green Mountains world, an old baby looked at the message from the sky and looked at his fellow apprentices hesitantly. Shangxian asked us to set up the magic circle. Although we can't see the real situation of this magic circle so far, I think it is used to transfer the spiritual opportunity of the Green Mountains, right? Will there be any accidents? Another old baby smiled and said, Senior fellow apprentice, you worry too much. Do you think Shangxian really wants to harm us and needs to find these troubles? Hesitation is not the way to do great things. The Jin Dan below were also talking about whether they should take action or not. They just knew about this, and some of them had realized that things were unusual. The way the Green Mountains solved the dispute was very fair. It was still a vote. Yuan Ying had 10 votes, Jin Dan had 3 votes, and Zhu Ji had 1 vote. In this way, 80% of them still agreed to act according to the promise. However, the voices of opposition had already reached 20%. Almost all of the Foundation establishment cultivators and the great majority of core formation cultivators continued to support it. They were the greatest beneficiaries of the increase in the strength of the spiritual vigor. The opposition came from the higher-ups, a portion of core formation cultivators, and more than half of nascent soul cultivators. The higher one's cultivation level was, the more far-sighted one would be. Even if they were weak, nascent soul stage cultivators who lived in remote places all the time, they were still nascent soul stage cultivators with their own unique judgment and partial intuition. They could vaguely smell that something was wrong from the traces. Although everyone decided to act according to the plan through the referendum, there were still some small links that were actually controlled by the Yuanying. This was also the truth of the world of cultivation. Fairness was relative. Privilege existed everywhere, but it was obvious or not. Did they know when to stop? The Yuanying ancestors gathered together not to discuss whether to set up the magic circle according to the agreement or not. This had been decided by the referendum. They could not destroy the letter. The key was the details. There was still room for manipulation. An old baby looked solemn. The Green Mountains were faced with a choice. They had a great responsibility. They could not just rely on their passion like the younger disciples. There are 72 magic circles, and each circle has 3 scales. I have studied them carefully. They should be the throttles that control the spurting of spiritual opportunity. The position of the turquoise is the lowest strength. The position of the agate is the middle position, and the strongest position is the green diamond. Exalted Immortal's message just now was for us to place it at the position of the blue diamond. That doesn't seem appropriate. Another Yuanying said with concern, I remember that a few years ago, when the great Immortal gave us these arrayed discs, he joked that among the 3 positions, the turquoise and agate positions would solve the problem. Unless it was a special situation, the green diamond position would not be used, just in case. What is normal? My understanding is that it's normal to activate them one by one. If it's abnormal, there must be something wrong. Without even trying the first 2 positions, he directly used the blue diamond position. What did that mean? Was there an accident during the process of transferring the spiritium? Or was it man-made? If it is man-made, will Shangxin act rashly regardless of the consequences of the Green Mountains? Combined with Exalted Immortal Lu's warning, I feel that we still need to be extremely cautious. These Exalted Immortals can walk away after making a mistake, but where can we go? The doubts of the 2 old Yuanying received the approval of several other Yuanying. To them, stability was more important than anything else. Under the premise of stability, it would be best to have the opportunity to increase the strength of the spiritium. However, if there was a huge risk involved, would such an impulse be worth it? At this point, Lu Xiaoyi's arrangement had a certain psychological effect. He did not say it directly, but made these people suspicious. Usually, people with a meticulous mind would have this tendency. For example, the fox people. They would be suspicious of things that were said with certainty, but they would pursue speculations that were shrouded in fog. They would think that it was their wisdom that had discovered a big secret. Only by working hard to confirm such speculations could they show their wisdom. This was a deep understanding of the human heart. The arrangement of the marching monk was a tactical arrangement, but his casual response was a psychological attack. The difference between the 2 was self-evident. Then time is of the essence. We must quickly decide whether to act according to the Exalted Immortal's plan, or cut corners, or put the position at the safer position of the agate. The Yuanying doubted the judgment of the Exalted Immortals. This was something only the fox people of Green Hill could do. This was because their way of thinking was no longer completely the way of thinking of cultivators. They had begun to lean towards science, and science valued facts and evidence the most. To them, the biggest characteristic of a cultivator was doubt everything. Contempt contempt for authority. Stop discussing, there's no time. Let's vote. With just a few of us, I believe that all of you have your own opinions on this matter. Let's vote on what to do. Therefore, they voted again. Among the 7 yuan-ing, 3 decided to put the green diamond position at the risk. The main reason was that they were afraid that the exalted immortals would be unhappy. 3 suggested to put the agate position for stability, and 1 suggested to put it at the turquoise position, which was the safest. The result was clear. They definitely could not risk putting the green diamond position. Only the agate position was the most suitable for everyone's mood. They had already wasted a lot of time. Since the decision was made, there was no time to waste. The 7 yuan-ing jumped up and soon came to an open space outside Tinya City. This was also the place chosen by the exalted immortals. It was remote and uninhabited, which was the best place to set up the magic circle. The 7 of them each held the disc and set it at the agate position. Then they quickly set it up. In less than a moment, the 72 earth-killing spirit surging formation was ready. They didn't need to start it. It was remotely controlled by the exalted immortals. With their level, they couldn't control such a sophisticated exalted immortals magic circle. Will anything go wrong? If it doesn't work afterward, how should we answer when the exalted immortals ask us why we didn't act according to the order? The oldest yuan-ing smiled. What could go wrong? At most, the transfer of spiritual opportunity was not successful. As long as they still want to observe the secrets of the dreamland, they will definitely come again. What could be delayed? As for the mistake of putting it in the wrong position, it's not our fault. It's the error of the transmission beacon. This thing has been left here for so many years. Now the Tao state of the Green Mountains world is strange and unstable. It's reasonable for some mistakes to happen, isn't it? Everyone nodded and agreed. Speaking of shirking responsibility, this was not determined by the level. Every human being, even mortals, had countless reasons. As long as you wanted to, there would always be a reason. The cunningness of foxmen made them choose this response. Of course, they didn't know that exalted immortal Lu was still hiding in the depths of the ley lines. For them, safety was the first thing, especially when they knew that the future universe might not be peaceful. What is science? Science is continuous experiments, and then finding out the truth. So for them, they were never afraid of failure. As long as the intensity of the dose was increased little by little, there would always be a success. What is an experiment? First, a small dose and intensity. If everything went well, they would slowly increase it. This is what a student of cultivation should be. Chapter 21:13. Lu Xiaoyi did not know that his arrangement had produced a miraculous effect and might have saved his life. He was waiting for the strongest attack of the opponent. Wasn't it just 8 people going all out? He was mentally prepared. He just felt that the last attack of these fellows was a little slow and dragging. There must be a reason for this abnormality. Hence, he reversed the 5 elements of Green Hill and reversed the yin and yang within. The environment of Green Hill was naturally transformed into countless small 5 elements guidance formations. He did not seek to forcefully resist. He only sought to divert the force from the side and use his skills to break the force. This was his principle to deal with the large-scale pressure of the opponent. The understanding of the Tao realm, the slightest difference could lead to a huge difference. He was confident that he could easily divert the force of 8 people. The Tao realm would not be fake. In the early stages of the contest, there was a clear gap between the leader of the opponent and him. This was the prerequisite for him to use his skills. In the depths of Green Hill's spirit vein, Lu Xiaoyi waited quietly. In terms of the 5 elements and yin and yang, he was not weaker than the others. The only thing that worried him was the spirit vein. In the end, these early operations were to prevent the opponent from coming into contact with Green Hill's spirit vein. This was the purest power of spiritual opportunity. He had to protect the spirit vein from coming into contact with the other 8 stars. This was the bottom line. The collision of spiritual opportunity would not talk about the Tao realm. It was purely a matter of strength, instilling, and extracting. It was something that could not be faked. Everything he did was to protect the spirit vein. On this point, both sides were very clear. The spirit vein was closely related to the 5 elements and yin and yang of the domain. In other words, the most trustworthy protective cover of the mountains and rivers was the 5 elements and yin and yang of the domain. It could prevent spiritual opportunity from leaking out of the space. It could repair itself and create a cycle. Hence, the core was the spirit vein, but the Tao realm fight was between the 5 elements and yin and yang. This was the reason. He felt his heart sink. He knew that the words were coming. The 5 elements of Qingqiu were rotating crazily. At the same time, there were countless small changes. Like countless small whirlpools in the sea, they were crushed by external pressure and formed again. This process was the weakening of the influence exerted by external forces. The pressure was overwhelming. That was the power of 8 star fields. Even though it had been weakened for a period of time, when added together, it was still unstoppable. Apparently, the marching monks also knew that a prolonged battle would be disadvantageous to them. Thus, they tried their best to finish the battle in one fell swoop. Qingqiu's power of 5 elements and yin and yang was retreating under the pressure. It was on the verge of collapse, but it did not collapse. It was as if it was always one step away from the last straw. This was also Liu Xiaoyi's latest achievement in the 5 elements and yin-yang. He had perfectly integrated the Taoist evasive one into it. Therefore, his resistance and the countless guiding vortexes were always broken and formed again, multiplying and multiplying endlessly. There was no physical distance in the battle of the Tao realm, so there was no such thing as being unable to retreat. Theoretically speaking, as long as one's Tao intent was not broken, one would be able to stand tall forever, and his confidence in holding the Tao realm of 8 people by himself was based on this escape. Although it was weak when attacking, it was incomparably tough when defending. Showers never end. His escape would always exist, but what about his opponent's violent destruction? Not to mention 8 people, even 80 people would come to an end. The Tao realm was not something that could be solved by relying on numbers. After this duel, the opponent would finally understand this truth. Although the marching monk's strong attack had just begun, he used the escape to carry out the attack and defense of the 5 elements, which gave him incomparable confidence in the contact. He knew that he was already in an invincible position. This was not arrogance, but devoutness to Tao. It was also at this moment that a huge gap suddenly appeared in his seemingly weak, but actually tough defense of the 5 elements. It was like a general's front formation was watertight, but he found that he was suddenly attacked in the middle position of his army. Straight to the core, straight to the ley line. From the peripheral attack and defense of the 5 elements and yin-yang, it directly transformed into the purest attack and defense of spiritual vigor. Under such a change, his evasive one had completely lost its meaning, because the opponent had bypassed his defense. His mind flashed, and he immediately realized where the problem was. It was not that he was not careful enough, but he could guard against the opponent's arrangement under the ground, but he could not guard against the people's hearts. The marching monks directly drew in the cultivators of the Green Mountains and stabbed him in the back at the most critical moment. He could check the entire topography of the Green Mountains world, but how could he see through the hearts of every cultivator? The people of the Green Mountains directly set up an array, which completely destroyed his steady attack and defense rhythm. The function of the 72 Spirit Surging Array was to immediately set up a bridge between the ley line of the Green Mountains and the transmission of spiritual vigor from the outside world. It was not transferred by his will. In the fusion of the spiritual vigor, the two-way transmission was close at hand. If it was the spiritual vigor of a realm unrelated to the Green Mountains world, it would be very difficult to merge with the spiritual vigor of the Green Mountains, just like human blood could not be replaced with each other. But now the other 8 stars were of the same origin as the Green Mountains in the primitive times. They were the same continent, and in the end, they were divided into 9 brothers. Although after a long time, the nature of the 9-star spiritual vigor had been slightly different, and it was this slight difference that prevented the communication of the spiritual vigor from proceeding immediately. However, there was little time left for him. Under the same bloodline, the operation of the fusion was much easier. Once the fusion was completed, even if Lu Xiaoyi had great abilities, he could only retreat in dejection under the infusion of 8-star spiritium. This was because this was no longer the battlefield of the Tao realm. His evading one was useless here. It happened in a hurry, and everything was hanging by a thread. Lu Xiaoyi was not flustered at all. This was the excellent quality that he had to have as an extraordinary swordsman. In a split second, he had a comprehensive consideration of the whole situation and found the only way to win for himself. Directly destroy the 72 spirit surging array. This was the simplest way. It was also the most impossible way. Those formation plates had been connected with the cultivators of the Green Mountains. There was no distinction between them. Destroying the formation plates was killing people. The 72 spirit surging array did not need to do this. It did not need to bind the cultivators. This was not the means of a half-immortal. It was too naive, but the reason why the marching monk did this was that the formation plates bound the lives, so that no one dared to destroy them. His mind was vicious, his plan was comprehensive, and he calculated to the extreme. If he couldn't destroy the formation plates, he could only let the spiritual vigor bridge stand there. The preparation for the fusion of the spiritual vigor could be completed at any time. Once the nature of the 9 spiritual vigors became the same, there was nothing he could do. He still had time to do something. What he gambled on was the time needed for the connection of the 9 spiritual vigors. Should he gamble, or should he leave? He was faced with the final test. His countermeasure was not too familiar. It was still in the initial stage. Was it suitable to put it in such a dangerous situation? Lu Xiaoyi let out a long breath. He had forced himself into the abyss again. It was like this every time. It was not others who forced him, but he who forced himself. This was fate. Chapter 21:14. Time was precious, and it was the same for the marching monk. The plan was meticulous, and the results were good. However, he realized that there was a small flaw. It would take longer than he expected for the 9 different types of spiritual vigor of the 9 stars to completely fuse. If he had known, he wouldn't have sent in all 8 streams of spiritual vigor at once. In fact, 4 or 5 streams would have been enough to determine his victory, and it would have been fast enough to not give the swordsman any time to react. However, now that the spiritual vigor had rushed in, it would be more troublesome for him to retreat. The fusion of spiritual vigor couldn't be done individually, and he was the one who mobilized the spiritual vigor. The focus of this battle had changed from the battle of the Tao realm to the battle of spiritual vigor. The key to victory had shifted from the cube to him. Don't stop the attack of the Tao realm. Maintain enough pressure on him. Hold it back. The marching monk reminded the cube. The battle of the Tao realm couldn't determine whether the spiritual vigor would be infused or not, but it could determine whether the swordsman would stay or leave. In the battle of the Tao, it wasn't easy to retreat. In his heart, killing the swordsman was more important than infusing spiritual vigor into Green Hill. Now, the absolute advantage had been established. The influx of the 8 stars' spiritual vigor had completely suppressed the spiritual vigor of Green Hill by several times. This was the inevitable result of long-distance transmission, but the difference of several times wasn't something that could be overturned by one person's ability. This was real energy, and one couldn't create something out of nothing through some technique or Tao realm. Therefore, there was no accident. However, he still wanted to end everything as soon as possible, because in the many confrontations he had with the swordsman, he had always lost mysteriously. This person's ability to seize opportunities was unparalleled, and he couldn't be given enough time. Fusing spiritual vigor was easier said than done. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many cultivation realms that had to migrate due to the lack of spiritual vigor. If there was no spiritual vigor, Wouldn't it be fine to just transfer some from other stars? Their natures were different, just like how blood couldn't be exchanged and harmonized. Fortunately, these 9 stars were once blood brothers and had the same basic spiritual vein characteristics. He only needed to make some adjustments. After 100 breaths, he had already adjusted the essence of the spiritual vigor of 2 of the celestial bodies to be consistent with the spiritual vigor of the Green Mountains. It was still far from enough, but it was a very good start. According to his estimations, because of the long-distance transmission, he would need to gather the spiritium energy of 4 or 5 stars to completely control the transmission rhythm. Right at this moment, he faintly sensed a strand of devouring energy. It was domineering and tyrannical. With just one mouthful, it had completely swallowed the spiritual vigor from one of the celestial bodies. After that, it had continuously absorbed the spiritual vigor from that celestial body. Finally, the demon moth had appeared. The marching monk heaved a sigh of relief. He knew it would be like this. Since the boots had already landed on the ground, then he might as well fight to the death. What's going on with the spiritium energy of your star? The marching monk asked the half-immortal in charge of controlling the celestial body. The half-immortal was also very gloomy. The change had come so suddenly without any warning. He was only in charge of extracting the spiritium from the celestial body. As for the control of the spiritium after extraction, it was up to the marching monk to control it. The output of the spiritium has not changed, but the essence of the spiritium is changing. It's no longer the nature of this star, nor is it the nature of the Green Mountains spiritium. It's very strange. In my opinion, this should be a devouring energy. That swordsman is using the devouring Tao realm. Then, should I continue to output now? The marching monk's eyes turned cold. Continue to output. Continue to maintain the pressure. The devouring Tao? I want to see how big your stomach is and how you're going to digest it. Of course, it was the devouring Tao. As the controller, he had also sensed it immediately. However, although this Tao was very powerful, there was a problem that couldn't be solved. That was, how would you deal with it after swallowing it? Just like a human's mouth and teeth, they could eat 10 kilograms of food at once, but they could also eat thousands of kilograms of food. The problem was, where would they put the food? The swordsman was desperate. This kind of devouring method could only be used once, but how many times could he swallow? It didn't solve the fundamental problem. Ignoring the swordsman's disturbance, the marching monk continued to fuse the spiritium. At the same time, he was also paying attention to the swordsman's devouring ability. This was because he was also very interested in this ability. The devouring Tao wasn't a new thing. It had existed since ancient times. In a Heaven's Choice continent, there was even a tablet of the devouring Tao. It had existed for a very long time. When the half-immortals sorted out the new innate Taos that might appear after the change of era, the devouring Tao was a Tao that had great potential. It was a Tao that everyone thought highly of and had high hopes for. However, before some things could be solved, it was very difficult to use it as a direction to create one's own Tao. In the marching monk's plan, he had many spare Taos. Creating a Tao was the dream of every aspiring cultivator. There was no rule that said which Tao could be created and which Tao couldn't be created. Among his spare Taos, there were the illusory Tao, the devouring Tao, and so on. However, he felt that the illusory Tao was more suitable for his current situation. Nothing was set in stone. He would create whatever was suitable. Over the past 10 years in the Green Mountains, his confidence in the path of illusions had waned due to various reasons. However, who would have thought that what he lost on the swings, he would gain on the swings? Here, he actually saw the sword cultivator using his true ability of the Tao state, engulfment in desperation. Such an unexpected surprise caused a change in his thoughts. Previously, killing the swordsman was his priority, and transferring the spiritium to the Green Hill was his second priority. Now, stealing the devouring Tao was his priority, and killing the swordsman was his second priority. As for transferring the spiritium to the green hill, it had become dispensable. Cultivators were all profit-seeking people. Of course, their profit-seeking Tao was beneficial to them. As long as it was beneficial to them, they would definitely pursue it. Only by seizing the fleeting opportunity would they be a true cultivator. Previously, the swordsman's devouring Tao had happened too suddenly. He could only vaguely feel it and did not have the time to see what was going on. However, since the devouring Tao had happened once, there would definitely be a second time. He continued to exert pressure and waited. After learning the core of the devouring Tao, he would conveniently erase the original creation. Was there anything better than this? No one knew what he was thinking, because he was the one who controlled the spiritium fusion at the end. Of course, the benefits should be enjoyed alone. That was a most delicious. Furthermore, all of this was his arrangement. Without him, the others would not even be able to eat a fart. They would have been chased away by the swordsman long ago. He continued to fuse with the spiritium fusion with full concentration. He also focused his attention on the spiritium, trying to find the mechanism behind the swordsman's devouring Tao, and the solution to how he placed such a huge amount of spiritium energy. He couldn't rush the sword cultivator too much. He didn't want the sword cultivator to burst. Before he understood, he had to give the sword cultivator a few more chances to devour. Before the battle, he was the most determined person to erase the swordsman. However, in the end, he became the first one to have such thoughts. The wonders of the state of mind was where the joy of cultivation lay. Chapter 21:15. The marching monk carefully manipulated it. He couldn't go easy on the swordsman, and he had to maintain enough pressure on the swordsman. It was exhausting. However, his strength was indeed impressive. No one doubted him throughout the entire process, including the swordsman and his companions. Under such efforts, he fused with another astral spiritual opportunity. As he wished, the swordsman activated his devour skill again. This time, with his sharp senses, he finally discovered the secret behind the swordsman's devour skill. The reason why it was so easy to feed him was because of the evaded one. He needed to observe it more carefully. He decided to give the swordsman another chance to use it. Of course, it was also a chance for himself. 3 observations were enough for him to learn something. The Tao was interconnected, and it wasn't that complicated. A lucky operation broke the old saying that blessings never come in pairs, and misfortunes never come singly. Blessings could also come in pairs. Lu Xiaoyi was in danger. The danger didn't come from the outside world, but from himself. Devouring the spiritium was his last resort. To be honest, unless he withdrew and admitted defeat, there was no way he could withstand the surging 8-star spiritium. This was a battle of pure energy. Moreover, his opponent had been maintaining pressure from the 5 elements and yin-yang, causing him to be a little flustered. He only learned about the Tao of Devour from Hu Chi when he left the Path of Sorrows. This was the judgment of the Crow ancestor. However, the Tao of Devour had existed for a long time, and it didn't exist only because of the Crow ancestor. Any post-celestial Tao was a mutation of an innate Tao or a combination of several innate Taos. Among them, the Tao of Devour had an extraordinary foundation. It was a combination of the innate 5 ties. It was filled with the chaotic process of the universe devouring each other. With Lu Xiaoyi's accumulation of Tao, he had the ability to quickly gain entry to any innate Tao or post-celestial Tao. He could even reach a higher level immediately. This was determined by his unique Tao state. For example, among the 3 possible future innate Taos mentioned by Crow ancestor, the Tao of illusionary dreams originated from the complex combination of time, void, karma, and impermanence. Especially the time and void. Zhongyu wasn't too familiar with them. Thus, he was only at the entry level of the Tao of illusionary dreams, unable to improve further. The heavenly tribulation Grand Tao was formed from the combination of the 4 connate Grand Taos of fate, life and death, unity, and reincarnation. He had dabbled in all of them, but he couldn't be considered to be proficient in them. However, compared to the illusory Tao of dreams, his understanding of them was much deeper. The origin of the great Tao of devouring was even more complicated. The five ties, slaughter, unity. The complicated structure of the six innate Taos happened to be the Taos that he had fully mastered and recognized by the heavenly Tao. Therefore, he had an innate advantage in the mechanism of the devouring Taos. It could be said that he had a high starting point right from start. He could actually choose to devour the new great Tao, but there was a problem. The combination of the five ties and a massacre was the great Tao of devouring. Five ties plus creation. The five elements were the great Tao of the stars. One could only choose one of the two. They were two completely opposite directions of a universe's formation. One eventually formed everything in the universe, while the other's ultimate goal was to swallow the universe into a giant hole. Although he was a swordsman, his heart belonged to the light. Therefore, he chose the great Tao of the stars without hesitation. For the same reason, his attainments in the great Tao of devouring were involuntary. Although he couldn't achieve Tao unification, it didn't mean that he couldn't use it, even if he was still a little unfamiliar with it and wasn't precise enough, which was why it seemed violent and rough to the marching monk. This wasn't a problem with the great Tao, but a problem with the short amount of time. The monk thought that this was the swordsman's mysterious trump card. A swordsman with the great Tao of devouring was perfect. However, he didn't know that he had only been in contact with the great Tao of devouring for a few months, not even a year. At this moment of life and death, no matter how many Tao realm cultivators he had, none of them could deal with the surging spiritual opportunity. If he didn't want to lower his head and admit defeat, he could only gamble. However, after this gamble, victory meant life and defeat meant death. He chose to gamble because he believed in his devouring ability, because he had other uses for the spiritual opportunity he swallowed. Yes, it was the upper sun spirit. In fact, the upper sun spirit was no longer just a matter of the thickness of spiritual opportunity. In the 3 stages of Supreme, cultivation was a necessary condition for the last few stages, and he had reached this condition long ago. The main thing was an opportunity. Before the opportunity came, he didn't know what it was. It could be cultivation, spirit, or Tao realm, or maybe it was just a feeling of being moved and angry. Then now, what he felt was a collision of spiritual opportunity, allowing him to find his own opportunity in the collision of the 9 stars. Once he felt it, he had to act. From this point of view, he was actually not much different from the marching monk. The purpose of everything was to take a step forward. As for the future of Green Hill Star, it was just a matter of convenience. The marching monk's feeling was right. He felt the escaped one. In fact, in the operation of the great Tao of devouring, with the 5 ties as the cornerstone and under the guidance of slaughter, everything was ended with the returned one. All the spiritual opportunity returned to one, returning to the escaped one. In other words, not to mention the spiritual opportunity of a few stars. Even if he swallowed the spiritual opportunity of hundreds or tens of thousands of stars, it would only return to one. In layman's terms, there was a straight safety valve in the stomach. This was only in theory. It could only be done by a golden immortal who was truly in line with the great Tao of devouring. For others, it was difficult to completely return to one due to the size of the straight valve. There would always be something left behind that could not be cleaned up in a short time. It was the imbalance of imports and exports that caused the problem. Liu Xiaoyi had mastered 5 of the 6 innate great Taos based on the great Tao of devouring. The only one he had not mastered was the return one. Therefore, his straight valve was relatively small, and the consequence was that it was easy to swell. Then, this swollen spiritual opportunity was the opportunity for him to break through to the upper realm. It sounded very complicated, and it was even more complicated to think about. However, in the hands of a swordsman, it was simple. Life and death were predestined. Wealth and honor were in the hands of the heavens. Could you understand? You would never understand. Therefore, it was better to think after doing it. He swallowed the first spiritual opportunity, which was one of the 8 stars outside. The The so-called swallowing was not just a mouthful, but also an endless stream of subsequent spiritual opportunities. Obviously, his opponent wanted to stuff him to death. However, he was also looking forward to it. Because if his opponent stopped here, although his straight valve was small, the spiritual opportunity of 1 star could still easily return to 1. This was a balance, a dangerous balance. In an instant, the situation changed 100 times. To find the balance point in the turbulent spiritual opportunity, not only could he break his opponent's attack, but he could also complete the requirements of the upper realm. It was dancing on the edge of a knife. One mistake, and he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Fortunately, he had been working on another innate great Tao, the great Tao of balance. Was it a coincidence? No, this was cultivation. Chapter 21:16. Lu Xiaoyi's way of equilibrium was the way of dynamic equilibrium. Differential compensation was a topic he was currently researching. The direction of his research was how to achieve dynamic equilibrium between the 36 innate great Taos. The prerequisite was to understand all 36 innate great Taos. Therefore, this great Tao could only be completed at the moment when the epoch changed. It would also be the last great Tao after all the new innate great Taos were confirmed. Otherwise, there would be no balance. He used it here. It was a bit like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, but it was just right. Among all the scenes of the upper realm, this one was the most stable in terms of danger. This was also what he had been working on. After sufficient preparation, a thorough plan, and the right time, place, and people, the upper realm was the right path. As for the marching monk, it was just a small episode. He was now somewhat disdainful of him. He had already realized who his real opponent was. It was not in the main world, but in the heavens. It was the method of those immortals coming back. It was not only a threat to him, but also to all the cultivators in the lower realms of the main world who were determined to advance. The higher one stood, the further one could see. It was not his place to be calculative about other people's malice. Unite all the forces of the upper realm. After swallowing the first astral spiritual opportunity, he had not touched the opportunity of the upper realm. However, after he swallowed the second spiritual opportunity, the straight-through valve was not enough to separate the spiritual opportunity. He could not achieve perfect integration, and a huge amount of spiritual opportunity began to accumulate. The challenge was coming. The real challenge was not the upper realm, but how to reach it in such a short time. The marching monk would not leave him too much time, because killing him was the monk's real goal. Other people would take months or years to reach the upper realm, and it was the most straightforward to calculate in days. Now, his upper realm yang spirit had to be calculated in minutes or even in breaths. This was the real challenge. There was no way out. He had made sufficient preparations in the early stages, and there was nothing to hesitate about. His mind was set, and he completely abandoned everything. He put himself in a situation where he would either succeed or die trying. The most crucial prerequisite for yang spirit was the spirit severing. The spirit severing was the process of constantly affirming oneself. If one did not even recognize their own past, how could there be a future for cultivation? The spirit severing was the process of correctly recognizing oneself, not boasting, and not feeling inferior. Only by understanding oneself could a cultivator understand the world. He had already achieved the two most crucial points, and he had done it perfectly. When he split his spirit into the past, he abandoned the two great fragments. And when he split his spirit into the future, he created the most perfect template for himself. It was also because of such a solid foundation that he dared to make a decision here, instead of being impulsive in the heat of the moment. Under the nourishment of a massive amount of spiritual vigor, he began to officially split his spirit and take shape, starting from the past, reappearing in order, and finally the future. In view of the fact that the template was extremely clear, he no longer had to be in a dilemma like other cultivators in the upper realm of the Sun Spirit. It was him, there was no mistake. The reconstruction of the past was completed in an instant. Firstly, he had a firm goal. Secondly, he had a powerful spiritual vigor. In dynamic balance, he successfully integrated the remaining parts of his opponent's attack into his past self. It was also at this moment that his opponent had fused two more astral spiritisms. The pressure increased, and the Green Hill Spirit Meridian was unable to withstand it. This forced him to swallow two astral spiritisms at once, expanding his spiritisms to a dangerous 4. There was no other way. He could only force his way forward. The straight-through valve was open to the maximum, but it was still unable to effectively divert the flow. In a dangerous dynamic balance, he quickly constructed his present self. Needless to say, the template of his current self was ready-made. However, it required a huge amount of spiritual energy and the energy needed to reconstruct his physical body. He had prepared enough purple spirit, but in this case, it would be better to use the purple spirit from others, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, there was only one question. Could his unification withstand the final madness of his opponent? There is also the spiritual vigor of the 4 astral spiritisms, which doubled the energy of his current foundation. Mount Hua was a path. Just in case, he began to prepare another backup plan, involving his opponents in the Tao state of the 5 elements and yin and yang. If he succeeded, everyone would be fine. If he failed, everyone would be finished. Such a move no longer seemed to be a backup plan, but a life and death struggle, destroying jade and stone alike. He was a swordsman. Even if he died, he would never die submissively. 8 scapegoats were not enough, so he could only make do. The marching monk had seen the swordsman's devouring twice. The first time was too sudden, so his gains were limited. The second time, he saw it clearly and discovered the elusive one, which was the Tao of innate Tao's unification. This gave him a deeper understanding of the Tao of devouring. Relatively speaking, he preferred the Tao of devouring, which was simple and violent, with obvious effects. It was better than the Tao of illusory dreams, which was not direct enough. He wanted to see it one last time to confirm his judgment, but he did not expect to see it twice. At this point, he had seen through the swordsman's trump card. There were no more secrets. Contrary to Lu Xiaoyi, he had a deep understanding of the slaughter's unification. His weakness was 1 or 2 of the 5 ties. Therefore, he was interested in the Tao of devouring. The swordsman could do it, but the monk could not. Snatching the Tao from the enemy's hands was more satisfying than killing him. The Tao was obtained, and the first goal was completed. Now it was time for the second goal, to be able to devour the spiritual opportunity of 4 celestial bodies in one go and continuously absorb them after killing such a powerful competitor. Such potential made him shudder with fear and trepidation. He had to admit that if it were him, even if he had a deep understanding of the unification, he would not be able to bear the continuous absorption of 4 stars at the same time. He had to kill such a talent before it could be swayed. Full output. Next time, I will gather all 9 stars and merge them completely. I like to see how he can devour them. This was not a bluff. It was because during this period of merging the spiritual vigor of various stars, he had found the internal law. After all, they used to be a whole, and the internal connection could not be cut off. He said 9, not 8, including the Green Mountains world. He knew what the Green Mountains cultivator was thinking and playing tricks as soon as he activated the 72 earthly terminus spirit surging formation. However, he did not say anything and did not reprimand him. The little Yuanying wanted to play tricks onto the half-immortal. What was he thinking? The 3 controlling positions of turquoise, agate, and green diamond of the spirit surging formation were just on the surface. There was still the supreme authority in the dark. As long as he unlocked the supreme authority, this spiritual vigor communication bridge would change from a single plank bridge to a big arch bridge. At that time, the spiritual vigor of 9 stars would gather and merge completely. He would like to see how the swordsman could devour them. He had to complete all 3 goals. That was how he forced himself to be perfect. Chapter 21:17. Green Mountains World, outside Tianya City, in the Spiritual Surge Tactical Matrix. The 7 nascent soul stage cultivators of the Green Hill Mountains each stood at the foot of the formation and assisted in the operation of the formation. Even if they were only assisting, they could still feel the surging waves inside the formation, as if 2 towering waves were crashing against each other, neither giving way to the other. At this point, they finally understood what was going on. This was not a natural phenomenon, but a man-made control. 2 groups of superior immortals were fighting on the Green Mountains spiritual surge. There's only 1 person on one side and 8 on the other side. Just like in the Mu Dao meeting, superior immortal Lu is fighting against 8 people by himself, and he doesn't seem to be at a disadvantage. Of course, they couldn't understand the nature, purpose, mechanism, and mystery of the confrontation, but they could still figure out the most basic situation. For them, they didn't have much bias. They couldn't afford to offend the 8 superior immortals, but they could offend 1 superior immortal. Obviously, superior immortal Lu was the most powerful of the 9, and he was unreasonable. He didn't even bother to tell them about the future of the Green Mountains world, and he just attacked directly. It seemed that his reputation as a sh*t-stir was well-deserved and well-deserved. People at their level were powerless in such a confrontation. This was an indisputable fact. Both sides raised the banner of good for the Green Mountains. But in fact, who knew the real reason? The marching monks did it for the Tao they admired, and Lu Xiaoyi did it for the persistence of the idea. It seemed that there was not much difference between them and the wishes of the old people. They didn't even know who they should help. This was a false proposition. Even if they knew, they didn't know how to help. Fortunately, their bewilderment did not last for long. Although it involved the competition of 9 stars, the process of the competition was rather fast. In just an instant, the 7 of them felt their bodies shake at the same time, and they had been ejected out of the tactical matrix. At the same time, the entire 70-meter spiritual surge tactical matrix shone with red light and hummed. This was a situation that would only happen when the tactical matrix was overclocked and overloaded. A Yuanying who had a deep understanding of tactical matrices sighed. "Oh no, our little trick has been discovered. The exalted immortal has already abandoned us. I'm afraid that the current situation is even more extreme than when Qingzuan was here. I wonder if it's good or bad for Qingxiao." Everyone was speechless. Their worries began to spread. If the 8 ascendant immortals were victorious, would they come after them? The tragedy of a small domain was that when the immortals fought, the immortals suffered. Lu Xiaoyi felt as if all the spiritual vigor in the entire universe was pressing down on him. In an instant, he understood that he only had a few breaths of time. The self-construction was complete. Now that the ID and ego were complete, all that was left was the superego. He had purposely waited for the marching monk's final attack. On the table, marching monk had already revealed his cards. It was a straight, and now it was his turn. The pressure was far beyond his imagination. The marching monk's ability to fuse spiritual opportunity was indeed impressive. Previously, he had been holding back. Now that he was going all out, the gathering of spiritual opportunity was 1 star more than what he had imagined. Through the arrangement in Green Hill, he had suddenly widened the channel and made the spiritual opportunity of 9 stars come from the same source. In other words, in the next moment, he could drive the spiritual opportunity to transform Green Hill. Now, he couldn't escape because he had already swallowed 4 strands of spiritual opportunity. These 4 strands of spiritual opportunity still had their roots. It wasn't over when he swallowed them all. It was as if he had swallowed 4 energy strands. The spiritual opportunity was still continuously gathering along the 4 strands. Its strength didn't weaken at all. Instead, it strengthened slightly. It was the strength of the few ascendant immortals who were using all their strength to kill him here, to prevent future troubles. Was this a fatal blow? Lu Xiaoyi laughed darkly. At the same time that the mountain-like pressure broke out, his Tao realm changed from the 5 elements and yin and yang to the 5 ties. In the blink of an eye, the Tao realm and the spiritual opportunity were mixed into one. It was equivalent to adding oil to the fire, and it was him who had poured oil on himself. This process was equivalent to tying the two sides together. Didn't you want to cross the spiritual opportunity? Fine, I'll fulfill your wish. I want the spiritual opportunity. I want the Tao realm. I want everything. Under the 5 ties, the 9 stars seemed to have returned to the immemorial era. They were actually moving closer to each other. He was playing with his life. He wanted to fight to the death, destroy jade and common stone, and perish together. The 8 ascendant immortals all realized this. However, as ascendant immortals, they were even more clear that now wasn't the time to run away. Only by using the spiritual opportunity to kill the opponent before the 5 ties completely activated was the only way to fight. At the same time that the 5 ties activated, Lu Xiaoyi changed his Tao again. With the power of devouring, not only did he swallow the remaining 5 strands of spiritual opportunity, he even swallowed the 5 elements and yin and yang Tao realm in front of him. In the eyes of all the ascendant immortals, this swordsman was really crazy. Perhaps ascendant immortals could withstand such a huge amount of energy, but could ascendant immortals of the lower realm? That wasn't something a human could do. Only those who had transcended mortality and become ascendant immortals could truly withstand it. He knew that he was going to die, but he didn't care anymore. Lu Xiaoyi smiled cruelly. His future superego template appeared in his consciousness. It seemed to be blank, but also seemed to have something. It could be a rule of Tao, or it could be a kind of order, or it could be nothing, or it could be everything. That was his Hong. This blank space, or something similar to a blank space, was like a bottomless pit, as if it could contain everything in the universe. All the Tao realm, Tao, intent, the boundless spiritual opportunity, and even the 8 celestial bodies began to have the power to deviate their trajectories. Constructing a worldly immortal was one thing. Constructing a true immortal was another. If you wanted to construct a golden immortal, Daluo golden immortal, the template must have the corresponding construction power. For example, the Crow ancestor was at the black hole vortex in the depths of the Wall of Mirrors. If you wanted to construct a Hong, no matter what Hong was, at least in the history of cultivation, no one knew how much energy was needed to support it. But now they knew. The 8 ascendant immortals were also attracted by this devouring power. They couldn't help but begin to fly towards the Green Hill. No matter what method they used in the future, they couldn't get rid of this great power. Knowing that their lives were at stake, the ascendant immortals were shocked, but they couldn't do anything. They could only let themselves fly faster and faster under the attraction of the devouring power, flying towards destruction and death. Only the marching monk was lucky because he had glimpsed a trace of the secret of devouring before, so he could escape immediately. He knew that things were not going well. He had no time to care about his fellow sufferers. With a shake of his body, he flew away. In the violent changes of heaven and earth, the Tao realm was shaking, and the spiritual opportunity was fluctuating. 7 groups of magnificent Tao phenomena exploded in the atmosphere of the Green Hills world one after another, like 7 rolling thunders, echoing for a long time. The 72 earth-killing spirit surging matrix also collapsed in an instant. Fortunately, the Yuaniing of the Green Hills who had escaped far away were not hurt. When they were still in shock, a melodious Taoist song came into their ears. Body is the universe. Don't ask for anything else. And the hollow spirit is the deepest. But who knows the scene in the pot? Who remembers the worries of the human world? 5 grand constructions are in development, and the wind is strong and soft. Taming the ice starts from the beginning, and the sun recovers without knowing autumn. Chapter 21:18. Deep in the veins of the earth, Lu Xiaoyi's whole body flashed with dense light. It took a long time for him to calm down. The 3 gods were complete. The past, present, and future were unified and harmonious. Each had its own appearance and spirit. They had evolved from being rigid and independent to being in harmony with each other. They were based on each other, outside and inside, and relied on each other. This was the biggest difference between the Yangshan phase and other realms of supremacy. It was also a manifestation of a cultivator's ability to be immortal. After nearly 2,500 years of cultivation, Lu Xiaoyi finally entered the Yangshan phase. He had a rare ability for cultivators, rebirth. This speed of advancement was actually almost the same as that of the crow ancestor. After entering the Yangshan phase, his intuition was different again. Some vague feelings before were clearer. He found that his mentality seemed to have undergone a subtle change. It seemed that he could see everything around him more clearly and deeply, so he became more indifferent. He didn't go out rashly, and he was not in the mood to pretend in front of the cultivators of the Green Mountains. When the phase was high, the level of pretending was also high. Not only did it depend on how big or small he was, but it also depended on who he was pretending in front of to have a sense of accomplishment. What was the point of pretending in front of these people? They didn't even know what it meant. He just stayed in the depths of the spirit veins of the Green Mountains and carefully sorted out the acne that this battle might bring to the realm. He was a master of yin and yang of the 5 elements. Now, he was a real half-immortal in the first step of the Yangshan phase. No one knew the whole battle better than him. Naturally, he could deal with it at will. He was 2 steps away from becoming immortal. The spiritual opportunity of the Green Mountains world was still the same because the marching monk didn't have time to inject it in the end. This was also what he wanted. He didn't need to explain to the people of the Green Mountains, just like he didn't remind them at the beginning. Knowing too much would only increase their troubles. Being mediocre was not necessarily a bad thing for the people of the Green Mountains. It was good to live a simple life here and continue their cultivation science. He knew very well that these 9 stars could never go back to the past and reunite as one. If so, there might not even be an atmosphere that human beings relied on for survival. Keeping the original state was the best way to deal with the change of the era. However, they wouldn't understand the benefits now. They would only understand the importance of following nature after the change of the era. As Zhang Xian repaired the sword, he reviewed the process of his ascension to the upper realm, and a smile appeared on his face. Basically, everything was under his control. He had already used all the trump cards he had prepared for the upper realm. Especially in the end, the construction of his future transcendence greatness was the biggest trap for his enemies. These people had no choice but to run into him. They couldn't blame anyone else. He wasn't surprised that the marching monk had run away. After all, he was the one who had allowed him to do so. Originally, he had the means to keep this monk who had always been at odds with him. Although the monk had comprehended Devour during the battle, it was not worth mentioning in practice. How could the monk possibly escape from his grasp? But in the blink of an eye, he had a new idea, a new trap. As his cultivation level increased, his horizons were broadened, and his heart was broadened. Only then did he understand that killing people was actually giving preferential treatment to his enemies. What was the point of killing people in an instant? The Crow ancestor's biography clearly stated that in the end, not only did he not have many friends, he did not even have many enemies. His life was too boring. Why not leave a few enemies to dig holes for fun? What kind of threat could the marching monk pose to him now? He could not fight one-on-one, he could not network, and his understanding of the Tao realm was still lacking. These were all reasons for his mood. The most important reason was that he still had a use for this person, because this guy was actually spying on his Devour secret. Of course, he had to show it to him in Dafa. He was afraid that it was not detailed enough, that it would not be thoughtful enough, and that he would definitely teach and master it. This was because he was worried about the application of the new Tao in the future. Creating the Tao of Devour sounded very grand, but there were too many unpredictable things that he would have to face, especially the difficulties of the upper realm immortal court. This was destined. One was Devour, and the other was heavenly tribulation. The former would destabilize the innate Tao, while the latter would cause the immortal court to face calamities and eliminations. This was digging up the foundation of the immortal court. Did you think those old immortals would be grateful to you? They would definitely strangle such a person in the bud. Even the orthodoxy behind him would not be easily spared. That was why Crow Ancestor did not mention these two Daos to his sect, even though he knew that these two Daos could become innate Daos. He was afraid that someone in Xianyuan would work hard on these two Daos, and in the end, the whole of Xianyuan would be unlucky and suffer the endless anger of the immortal court. Buddhism was a big sect with a big foundation. Maybe they could withstand it? He had a feeling in his heart. Since the other party was eager to learn, why not sell it to him? Now that he had already sold the Devour secret, he would find a chance to sell Heavenly Tribulation in the future. Forget about Qing Xian. After all, they were brothers. It would not be good to go overboard. This was the reason why he purposely revealed the Devour secret and allowed him to leave. He was looking forward to seeing how far the marching monk could develop the Tao of Devour as a troublemaking expert that he had high hopes for. To be fair, among the inner and western scenic heaven half immortals that he had met, the little expert's talent, perseverance, and potential were second to none. There was no one more suitable than him. He was very satisfied. This was a perfect upper state. He climbed out of the pit and casually pushed the opponent into the pit. This was the fun of cultivation. It was much more interesting than just killing the person. The Green Mountains world slowly recovered its calmness under his constant tidying up. After all, too much spiritual opportunity was swallowed by his Hong in the battle. So in a short period of time, the intensity of the spiritual opportunity was slightly reduced. But it did not matter. As long as the 5 elements and yin and yang of the bounded domain operated normally, the spiritual opportunity of the Green Mountains would return to its original state in less than 100 years. Until the change of the era, no one could predict it. If the current spiritual opportunity did not change, there was a high probability that the spiritual opportunity would remain normal after the change of the era. Maybe there would be a surprise. If they really followed what the marching monk did, the spiritual opportunity of the Green Mountains would probably collapse after the change of the era. It was really irresponsible. There was no need to tell this to others. He knew, God knew, and that was enough. After another month, he had completely consolidated his state and tidied up the Green Mountains. He silently rose into the air and blessed in his heart. This kind of bounded domain was actually the real bounded domain of cultivation. It was because they knew to apply what they had learned to the mortal world. Unfortunately, it was unknown how many eras it would take for human beings to truly understand this truth. The information from the eyes of heaven appeared in his mind. The ancient beast god was obviously very satisfied. This little guy was very easy to use. He really did it. I am a brick of cultivation. I will move wherever I can use it. Lu Xiaoyi, you have completed the task well. Unfortunately, I have no reward for you. Well, no. The Tao of Heaven has already rewarded you. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. The Lord of Numinous Treasure and the ancient beast god were good at everything, but they were a little stingy. Send me to the Phoenix Nest? My wife may be there. Chapter 2119. Who knew the location of the Phoenix Nest better than the ancient beast god? Therefore, this request was very suitable. The ancient beast god didn't refuse, but he was a little dissatisfied. In the big family of demon beasts, the Phoenix bloodline is the noblest, and the heavenly fox bloodline is the smartest. You seem to have harmed them all. I'm warning you, you can only do it once, but not thrice. Then, he set up a space transmission. The nests of immemorial sacred beasts were usually in the most remote places in the universe. Without exception, their goal was to stay away from humans. This was the instinct of immemorial beasts, because humans were the only cultivation race they feared. They didn't want to lower their heads, curry favor with humans, and didn't dare to make enemies, so they could only avoid them. If they couldn't provoke them, couldn't they just hide? The Phoenix Nest was in the depths of the North Celestial Pole, and it couldn't be measured by physical distance. If there was a word to describe it, it could only be endless. He flew in the cold void. Yes, it was cold. In the void of the universe, there were not many places that could make a cultivator, especially a genuine half-immortal like him, feel cold. This meant that the temperature had dropped to the extreme. If one were to use the measurement standards of a certain world to describe it, it would probably be more than 100 degrees below zero. His body couldn't bear it alone, and he also needed to restrain all the elemental energy in his body to maintain his bodily functions. A place like this was a natural place to live in seclusion. The environment itself was enough to make most of the cultivation creatures stop. When they gradually felt colder and colder, they had no choice but to return. Perhaps only the strongest half-immortal cultivation creatures dare to come here. Even if Supremes dared to come, they wouldn't have much ability to protect themselves. The environment determined the level of the creatures. In recent years, he had been in contact with non-humans. First, it was the spiritual treasures, then the demon beasts. This wasn't a coincidence, but a part of his future plan. The four celestial poles of the universe were controlled by humans, Taoists, and Buddhists respectively. The southern celestial pole was the sky of demon beasts, and the northern celestial pole was the head of spiritual treasures. At least in the immortal court, it could be seen that spiritual treasures and demon beasts were forces that couldn't be underestimated in the cultivation world of the universe. He saw these two forces as his potential base, and he didn't hesitate to invest in them. In the big family of demon beasts, the three core branches were immemorial beasts, mutated beasts, and demon beasts. Mutated beasts couldn't be controlled, and they didn't have any clan inheritance. They could be ignored, but they couldn't be looked at. Among the demonic beasts, he had many allies, such as peacocks, heavenly foxes, great geese, and so on. Among them, the most important and influential one was the immemorial beasts. During the First Universe War, he helped complete the fusion of the immemorial sage and the ferocious beasts. Although it didn't seem to be very harmonious now, at least there weren't any major conflicts. The dragon race, Shangliu, nine-headed snakelet, and other powerful primordial beasts had a good relationship with him. He only lacked the two most powerful primordial beasts, the phoenix and the roc. Depeng seemed to be a little resistant, mainly because it was a little disappointed that the beast rights had fallen into someone else's hands. This was something that it could not accept. This was not something that could be changed in a short period of time. He didn't need all the demonic beasts to submit to him wholeheartedly. In fact, it was impossible for him to do so. But since the Great Roc's attitude was neither friendly nor distant, he had to gain the support of the Phoenix race. In that case, the matter of the demonic beasts was already set. As for finding a wife, that was just an additional reason. It wasn't that he was heartless, but that Han Yin hadn't seen him for so many years. That in itself meant something. For a human and a noble demonic beast to live together and form a family, this in itself was a fantasy story. Spiritual harmony was the core. This was destined. At his current level, he also completely understood the way high-level demonic beasts got along with each other. They couldn't be viewed with the eyes of mortals or humans. Husband and wife singing together, leaving early and returning late. Harmony in the Guqin and the Zither. These were the lives of ordinary people. It was simply impossible. Harmony in the Guqin and the Zither was a virtue for mortals to persevere for several decades. It was a form of enjoyment that was praised by people. But if tens of thousands or millions of years were to persevere like this, they would definitely become crazy. Any fixed way of life would be tiring. Time would destroy everything. Only the spirit would last forever. After understanding all these, he really came to see his wife. He really came to see, talk, chat, and talk about the future. The universe would change, and the epic would change. But he would never return to the past, just like when he was in the Foundation establishment stage. They were no longer young. Both of them carried a lot of burdens. Being able to support each other was the most important thing. Showers wouldn't last forever. Gentle winds wouldn't last forever. Only by living peacefully could one live for a long time. On this point, he actually envied the crow ancestor the most. An immortal couple, envied by others. He no longer had the chance to have the same happiness. Because in the middle and low stages of his cultivation, he didn't meet the right person or the right environment. The only one, Xia Bingji, was still a Taoist. He didn't meet her when he was young, and it would be harder to meet her later. The biggest difference between cultivators and mortals in terms of relationships was that there was no sunset glow. Because their shortcomings were getting fewer and fewer, they were more far-sighted, and they were less and less impulsive. And the true essence of relationships was impulsiveness. Senior Sister Smoky Turtle once asked him, "Xiaoi, is your relationship going smoothly?" His answer was very helpless. "It's going smoothly. There was no one along the way. Along the way, there would be fewer and fewer people. Not to mention precious relationships. Even friendships would become fewer and fewer, and even hatred." So in the end, when he let the marching monk go, it might have been because of this strange thought. There weren't many fun and capable enemies left, let alone others. The temperature was getting lower and lower. In such a temperature, there were very few gas nebulas. Even if there were, they would be in the shape of ice crystals, like a large scale of pentagonal crystal flowers. When such crystal flowers covered your eyes, the beauty was indescribable. Phoenixes, in fact, were good at fire, but they were willing to stay in such an extremely cold place. The mystery behind it was thought-provoking. Of course, there were no ordinary mortals in this airspace because there was no atmosphere. Because even if there was an atmosphere, it would be frozen into a layer of crystal flowers. If you wanted to breathe in oxygen, you couldn't rely on breathing. You had to rely on eating. This was not a place where mortals and low-level cultivation creatures could live. When the cosmic rays shone in, everything was suffused with gorgeous colors. It was as if one was in a huge, three-dimensional crystal palace. Vision was limited to the extreme here. Light and shadow were chaotic and dazzling. Lu Xiaoi walked through such a gorgeous world of crystal light. Besides the cold, another characteristic was that it was clean, as if not even the tiniest speck of dust could stay. It made his heart empty in the cold silence, and the occasional distracting thoughts in his heart seemed to be blasphemous to this world. It was indeed not suitable for humans, because the crystal flowers here were countless demon-revealing mirrors, making the evil in one's heart unable to hide in such cleanliness. Chapter 21:20. There were no illusions or traps in the Phoenix's nest. Even the layout of the space was not complicated. This was the bearing of the king of beasts. It was also a trait that the Phoenixes disdained. They did not need to use these methods to conceal their nest. It seemed as if there were no defenses against any living creatures. However, the reality was that this was the place with the least visitors among the wonders of the universe. Because the Phoenixes did not ask for anything, they did not desire anything. You could not obtain anything from this place, nor could you threaten anything. Their cold temperament had been like this since birth. They did not come here not because it was dangerous, but because it was meaningless. No one was willing to travel hundreds of millions of miles to come here and experience what it meant to feel unworthy. Improper thoughts could not be tolerated in this ice crystal sky region. Lu Xiaoi felt himself getting colder and colder. It had long exceeded the endurance of his body. Of course, it did not matter under the circulation of his elemental energy. It had long exceeded the endurance of his body. It was precisely because it was getting colder that he knew he had not flown to the wrong place, until he saw a parasol tree in the distance. It was an ice crystal parasol tree that stretched from top to bottom. It was like a large-scale domain. However, it was not the usual round shape of a domain. It was a parasol tree. The snow-white tree transformed into a 9-colored stream of light that could be seen clearly from far away. There were phoenixes. Only parasol trees would perch. In such a big place, the ice crystal world, the extremely cold environment, and the pitiful number of races could be summed up in one word: desolation. For the first time, he tidied his clothes. This was not out of fear, but respect for nature and the living creatures here. The current him did not need to be afraid of anyone. The crow ancestor was invincible because of his past. He was fearless now because of his future. Why don't you try slaying me? You won't even lose a strand of hair if you tire yourself to death. Of course, this was only in theory. His future Hong was not a real Hong. It was still far from being a real Hong. However, in the main world, he really did not need to be afraid of anyone, including the phoenixes. He did not use his sword to show off because he was worried that his rudeness would destroy the peaceful environment here. It was as if the slightest movement would cause these countless crystal flowers to shatter. It was just a feeling. Of course, it was impossible. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. This was his experience. Just like that, he flew all the way. The parasol tree seemed huge and was right in front of him, but it was quite strenuous to actually fly. He did not use his full strength. It was like an outing, a place to cleanse one's soul. However, he estimated that he would not come here often. A layman like him preferred an environment with more smoke and fire. There was noise, the smell of cooking food, the fragrance of cosmetics, and a dazzling lineup of street sceneries. People should stay where they are. Amidst the countless intersecting dots of light, there was one that stood out from the rest. It had its own rainbow colors, and it was a small phoenix that was rapidly approaching. Lu Xiaoyi smiled as he waited. He knew who she was, no matter what form she took, because they used to have an incomparably intimate relationship. It was only when the small phoenix approached and circled around his body 3 times that he was overflowing with joy. He stretched out his hand and spread it flat. Little Phoenix landed on his palm and spoke in human language. Lu Xiaoyi, you finally came to see me. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Han Yin, isn't your development too slow? Little Phoenix stretched out her head and pecked his hand. It's only been 2,000 years. I'm just taking an afternoon nap. Do you think we're the same as you humans? Han Yin was currently in the Yuanying realm. In fact, she was in the initial state of a small phoenix. It was not slow, but she had not grown up at all. Of course, for a race with a long lifespan like the phoenixes, this amount of time was really nothing. Was it a smoky peacock or a small phoenix? In fact, Lu Xiaoyi was not too sure. He also did not want to ask why she was in the foundation establishment state at the 5th ring. It was fine as long as she was fine now. As for the phoenix race's private matters, it was better for him not to casually get involved. Towards Han Yin, he only wanted to say goodbye. It's been 2,500 years, but things have changed. It's like a dream. Little Phoenix flapped her wings. No, things are still the same, but I don't think the surroundings have changed. There was no way to chat. The so-called feelings and emotions of humans were completely meaningless in the Phoenix's eyes. You think it's like the blue sea turning into mulberry fields, but they think it's like passing clouds. They were not on the same channel at all. In the cold ice crystal world, talking about these things with a cold little Phoenix, it would only get colder and colder. Moreover, this little Phoenix was deliberately making things difficult for him. Just like a child who had not grown up and only took an afternoon nap after 2,000 years, it sounded depressing. He felt as if he was dreaming. What happened on the 5th ring's boating island was like a dream, an incomparably real and incomparably illusory dream. He decided to slowly forget this dream. It would be good for him. Thus, he resumed his usual unruly attitude. Why are you always in this form? I still want to see what you've become now. 2,000 years is too long. I've already forgotten. Little Phoenix proudly raised her head on his arm, spread out her wings, and spun around, showing her beautiful feathers. Of course it's this form. Wherever I am, that's my form. In the human world, I'm in my human form. Do you think it's appropriate for me to change into my human form here at the parasol tree? Moreover, it's not important what I look like. What's important is that no matter what I look like, you'll be able to recognize me at a glance, right? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. It was very reasonable. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Thus, with a grope, a set of tools quickly appeared on his body. Those were the goose feathers and peacock feathers that he had swindled from the East Heaven Main world's beast territory. He wore them on both his hands and feet, flapping his arms like wings. Come, Let's fly together." Little Phoenix cried out. Little E was still that little E. She had not changed at all. Even if she was very familiar the moment they met, she would revert to her old ways after a few breaths. The real and fake little birds chased each other in this ice crystal world. When the real one flew, it was very graceful and elegant. The fake one, however, flew very clumsily and even shed feathers. "Can you stop bumping into me all the time? This feather is not very stable in the first place. Don't think you're amazing just because you have wings. If you bump into me again, I'll make sure you can't even touch me." Lu Xiaoyi complained. He was mainly imitating the flight of birds. It was like he was learning how to walk. It was not a problem with his own speed. Little Phoenix's cry was clear and bright. It was incomparably happy. "If you have any ability, feel free to use it. I'm not afraid of your half-immortal cultivation here. A body of smelly feathers. Is it the bloodline of the great rock?" It became even worse. Not only did it bump into him, it also pecked. It did not peck the beautiful feathers given by the peacock, but the coarse feathers plucked by the goose. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. After nearly 3,000 years of cultivation, the so-called childishness had long left him. He did not know what it was. But here, in this special environment, with special companions, he could not help but completely relax. He threw all those schemes and schemes to the back of his mind. In this clean, cold, and beautiful ice crystal world, he was willing to be a child. Chapter 21:21. When Lu Xiaoyi really started his performance, Little Phoenix would never be able to catch up with him, no matter how hard she tried. "Lu Xiaoyi, you're flying so ugly. It's like cramping. Not to mention the Phoenix race. Even all the winged races don't fly as ugly as you." Lu Xiaoyi proudly said, "This is the zombie flying technique. You don't understand, right? The heavenly axiom says, no matter if it's elegant flying or zombie flying, whoever catches the other will fly easily." In the ice crystal crown of the parasol tree, a phoenix quietly looked at everything in front of her. It seemed like déjà vu, as if it was yesterday. She also had such contact with humans in the past, and it was even closer. She used her claws to carry them all the way through the stars and clouds, rampaging through everything. It was much more exciting than this. 20,000 years was not a time for phoenixes. The freezing cold here was as if even time had been frozen. But in these 20,000 years, too many things had happened. Even if she was as calm as a phoenix, she was still alarmed at every step. The seed that was planted before she left had finally begun to take root and germinate, growing strong and healthy, and was about to bear fruit. The only problem was no one knew what kind of fruit it would bear. Would it be an immortal fruit or a poisonous fruit? During this process, she knew far more than the other living beings. As that person's friend, in the last period before they ascended to immortality, they spent almost every day together, searching for the great Tao together, chasing their dreams together, helping each other in the same boat, going through thick and thin together. The only difference was that humans might not have walked for as long as creatures like her, but they walked fast enough, so fast that even a phoenix at her peak could not keep up with his footsteps. But walking fast might not be a good thing. It could also lead to the abyss, to destruction. So, she understood him very well. He also never avoided his own thoughts in front of her, those crazy, rebellious thoughts that deserved to be cut into pieces. The most terrible thing was, not only did he think so, he also did so. So the moral descendant opened a new chapter of the era. She did not participate in this process from the beginning to the end. It was not that she did not want to, but that person did not let her. He told her very clearly that it was not the right time. If she was willing, she could only throw herself in at the next stage. She was very clear that what he said was right. She had no right to participate in the first stage of destruction. At this stage, the only ones who could fight side by side with him were those like-minded people in the sky, including her natal Dowlord. There was no need to put all of his strength into it. She was very proud. Because in the midst of this change, in this epic-making flood, her closest friend, her life's Tao master, had thrown himself into it without hesitation. Morality, destiny, lead the way. Since then, she had never slept again, even though sleeping was the cultivation method that Phoenix was most used to. She was afraid that she would miss the opportunity that she needed to participate in the most once she dozed off. She paid attention to every major realm change in the origin world, the structure of power, the rise and fall of people. She was observing the power of the demon beasts that were spread throughout the universe. This included many of them, including the peacock race, the dragon race, and so on. Finally, more than 2,000 years ago, an insignificant person began to appear in her field of vision. However, she had a feeling that one of her illegitimate juniors was also on the fifth ring for some reason. Thus, there was a beginning, and it was natural. After that, with the passage of time, this insignificant person, who had only been a potential possibility, began his astonishing growth. Faster and faster, more and more immeasurable, like the rise of a comet. She only watched from afar, but everything that happened in these 2,000 years made her unable to breathe. Her several million years of life was not as exciting as this little guy's 2,000 years. She finally understood why humans were the rulers of this cultivation world, and not them, the so-called creatures of heaven and earth with a golden spoon in their mouths. She also finally understood why her friend told her to wait. What she was waiting for was not an opportunity, not an event, and not a change, but a person who was stirring things up. From this insignificant person, she seemed to see her friend's past. Perhaps many things were different, but the core was not different at all. The East was dawning, everywhere was stirred up. It didn't matter, it was just stirring things up. Just a few hundred years ago, this little guy finally discovered something. This was the key to determining the direction of the stirring. She couldn't help but want to go out of the mountain to guide the little guy and protect him. However, the little guy once again exceeded her expectations, and without hesitation, he cut off his relationship with her and her friends. His wings had hardened, and he wanted to fly alone. This was also what she was most worried about. It didn't matter if he left her, but if he left her friends, would the little guy continue to grow? The facts told her that Xianyuan was a hotbed for stirring things up. After leaving them, the little guy climbed faster and flew higher. Now, she finally understood that the essence had not changed. Only the method and strategy had changed. Her friends were stirring things up, and this little guy was stirring things up along the way. Both were right. Because the situation was different, the environment had changed, and the era had moved forward. It was also at this time that the little guy, after cutting off the connection between them, personally came to find her. She understood what he meant. He came here only to represent himself, to represent a new force, a new power. Everything had nothing to do with the past. How their relationship would be defined in the future would depend on this conversation, and not on those old friendship. This was a confident little guy, a little sad, but she also understood that only the current him was the most suitable, the most trustworthy, the one with the most hope of success. Don't say that you are ignorant of the road ahead. The world knows you everywhere. She originally thought that there were a lot of things that she needed to remind this little guy, but now it seemed that there was no need. He had his own way, his own path, his own ideas, and, am I already old? Aging would never appear on a phoenix. But this was only physically, mentally. She felt that she was really old. She had just gotten used to her friend's rhythm, and now the person had changed. The two little guys were fooling around all the way, and finally, they were close to the parasol tree. The little phoenix began to tiptoe, looking like an honest boy. The swordsman also knew to remove some of the nondescript things on his body, and tidied up the nonchalant things along the way, putting on the look of an obedient child. Whether a child was obedient or not, one could not depend on his attitude of admitting his mistake, but on his indifference when he threw your instructions to the wind. The little phoenix cried softly, "11th Aunt, Xiaoi is here to see you." Lu Xiaoi did not hesitate. Aunt. It seemed that he had already called 2 aunts during this period of time. It was really every night when he entered the bridal chamber. There were mothers-in-law in every village. This old guy was really restless. He was everywhere. Chapter 21-22. The deep conversation with Aunt 11 gave Lu Xiaoyi a deeper understanding of what happened before the Crow ancestor took the Tao down to the lower realm. Aunt 7 and Aunt 11. The Crow ancestor came alive from their mouths. The glorious past, the unknown secrets, the dusty history, scene after scene unfolded in front of him. These two aunts would not tell their story to just anyone. Regarding his accident, only the person whom they approved the most, the person who could carry the banner of the Crow ancestor, would be favored by them. Lu Xiaoyi was the first and possibly the last. You're right to be worried. We always think that the battle of the universe is just a battle of Daos, orthodoxies, races, and realms. It's not wrong to think that way. It's just that we don't stand high enough and don't see far enough. Li Weia also said that for the new era, the first of all battles must be the battle between the old and the new. It's the battle between the conservative forces and the emerging forces. In other words, your future main opponents are the backup plans of the heavenly immortals in the lower realm. The premise of being careful of them is to distinguish them accurately. Lu Xiaoyi deeply agreed. He also made the same judgment. How to judge? I can't teach you because I'm not at that level. In general, if it's the backup plan of the golden immortals, then their Tao state will be inclined towards their own Tao, which is more conservative. But this doesn't mean that those who create new Taos must be the cultivators of the lower realm. Those human immortals and true immortals relied on their acquired Taos to reach their realm. Of course, they wish to change their acquired Taos to innate Taos and work hard. Are they opponents or friends? You need to have your own rules. You have to pay attention to the interior realm. Most of the ambitious acquired Taos are born in the interior realm. Pay attention to the immortals there. If you find something similar to their Taos in the chaos of the universe, it's very likely that it's the escape route of these immortals in the lower realm. He had to admit that Aunt 11's insight was very unique. This was indeed a direction that he did not think of. These ordinary immortals who succeeded in the upper realm of ancient techniques but did not have innate Taos, who wouldn't want to use the east wind of the change of era to push their acquired Taos up. It was not a possibility, but a certainty. However, if he were to treat these people as his opponents and blindly make enemies, the pressure on him would be too great. As for the specifics, he still had to carefully consider. Madame Light 11 continued. The change of an era is not a complete negation. The immortal court will be replaced with new blood. This is neither realistic nor safe. Back then, Li Weia and I often discussed how to stabilize the transition if there were changes in the celestial court. There would be earth-shaking new rules without affecting the stable order of the celestial court in the world of cultivators in the universe. In our opinion, the new forces would be no more than 50%, possibly even less. In other words, he had to tolerate and understand the immortals' desire to save themselves. They had the right to do so, and doing so was not necessarily a bad thing. The change of an era might happen in an instant, but the aftermath would last for at least tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore, don't think that you can achieve your goal in one go. Instead, you will only ruin things and force these forces into a state of life and death struggle. Therefore, when you are considering some problems, you must pay attention to leaving a way out for these forces so that they can see hope. They will not do anything in desperation. Lu Xiaoyi smiled as he listened to the advice. Madame 11 and Madame 7 were different. They had the same advice, but they leaned towards different directions. For example, Madame 7 leaned towards the reality of the Tao realm, while Madame 11 was good at overall planning. What made Lu Xiaoyi curious was, were their personalities originally like this? Or did the Crow ancestor deliberately lean towards different directions when communicating with them? If it was the latter, the Crow ancestor was too cold and heartless. When he broke shoes, he still had a plan for the future and put the eggs in different baskets, The main conservative forces will be concentrated on the golden immortals. They have no choice but to do so. They can't change it. As for those golden immortals who are on the side of change, other than morality and fate, nothing else can be determined. They had hidden themselves very well in order to protect themselves from being attacked by a group of people. The Master of Fate once made a judgment, and I deeply agree with it. Perhaps we can roughly determine which great Tao masters are more active and which are unwilling. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, Madam 11, please go ahead. This is very important to me. Madam 11 said softly, since the collapse of the universe's great Tao, the lower realm cultivators have often speculated about the order of collapse. The mainstream thought has always been that the only basis for determining the order of collapse is the order of the universe's formation. There are many schools of thought, such as the 5 grand factions, the 5 fortune faction, the 5 virtues faction, the 5 elements yin-yang faction, the time and space faction, etc. But no matter which school it is, they all judge from the process of the universe's formation. So everyone thinks that some great Taos will definitely collapse in front, such as those that are not important, irrelevant, and empty. Some will definitely collapse later, such as those that are closely related to cultivation, such as the 5 elements yin-yang, time and space. Do you think so too? Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. What's wrong with that? Yes, I think so too. It seems that all the cultivators I've met think so too. Is there a problem? Madam 11 said seriously. If morality collapses, will there be no morality in the world? If fate collapses, will there be no fate for everyone? It still exists. It's just that it's missing a program, a framework, and a strict system. The universe will still operate, and the rules will still exist. Similarly, if the 5 elements collapse, will there be no 5 elements? If yin and yang collapse, will there be no yin and yang? If time collapses, will there be no concept of time? If space collapses, will the universe be a mess? Definitely not. Which means that the order of the collapse of great Taos is not entirely dependent on the order of the universe's innate Taos. There may be a certain influence, but it is definitely not the main factor. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes widened. The main factor is, Madam 11 said word by word, the main factor might be whether the innate Tao Lord is willing to collapse or not. Maybe he also felt the selflessness of the destiny of morality and decided to follow it. So, the great Taos that collapsed in front might be the combination of the innate Tao Lord's wish and the order of the universe's Taos. We can't determine if the great Taos that collapsed in front are willing, but there are definitely more who are willing. But what we can be sure of is that the great Taos that collapsed in the end are the most unwilling, and they're also the most likely to be our opponents. Lu Xiaoyi fell into deep thought. He had to admit that the Tao Lord of Destiny had a very deep view of the problem. He did not consider the problem from the nature of the great Taos, but from the psychological changes of people. Very likely. Chapter 21-23. From the heavenly fox, he obtained the crow ancestor's vision of the great Tao. The great Tao of devouring and heavenly tribulation would completely change the entire cultivation world. From the phoenix, he also obtained 2 extremely important pieces of information. It was about the ancient immortals who ascended to immortality in the interior realm and the bold analysis of the position of the golden immortals. But the crow ancestor and the master of destiny had already predicted the future before they took action 20,000 years ago. Now, it seemed that the almighty immortal's foresight was not to be underestimated. Change required the wisdom and strength of a group. It wasn't something that could be solved by one person. With the 2 Tao Lords in front of him, there would definitely be more people who dared to stand out and speak out. Just based on this information, his running around for the past few years was not in vain. The heroes and the legends did things very easily. But only when you really did it, you would know that it was complicated. It wasn't something that could be solved just by challenging the immortal court on a whim. Aunt 11 and the Tao Lord of Destiny were also in contact. Aunt 11 sank in her memories. Back then, The crow ancestor and I were traveling around the Heaven's Choice continent. We were trapped in the Destiny Tao tablet. Later on, we communicated with the Tao Lord of Destiny and escaped. After that, because of the Phoenix's natal Tao realm, I would occasionally communicate with the Tao Lord of Destiny, especially after that dead man forced Tao to descend to the lower realm. There were many things that the dead man didn't tell me. I knew that he was worried that I would act rashly. It was only when the Tao Lord of Destiny occasionally reminded me that I understood many things. Now that I think about it, it seems that everything was already decided by fate. Lu Xiaoyi curled his lips. What fate? It's just two scheming old foxes digging a hole to bury people for fun. But there was one thing that he could see. The crow ancestor's feelings for Anne 11 seemed to be deeper than Huchichi. The less he said, the more he cared about her. But he didn't dare to say these words out loud. It would provoke the innate Tao of Vinegar's attack. He couldn't afford to provoke that. Thus, he laughed it off. The Tao Lord of Destiny will never be lacking in the innate Tao. This time, Anne 11's chances are not small. Didn't the Tao Lord of Destiny say anything before he died? Anne 11 glanced at him. I don't know the Tao Lord of Destiny, and no one will ever be able to Destiny. Just like how no one will ever be able to successfully conform to morality. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes narrowed. This was a main point. He had a faint premonition, but it wasn't too clear. What do you mean? Just Anne 11 sighed. The two of them are arrogant on the inside and have the universe in their hearts. They have great feelings and are willing to give up. They even pretend to be great. The two of them regarded morality and fate as their own private property. They brought them into the human world and did not want to return them. Therefore, it was not an empty phrase to say that morality was inferior to the lower realm. This was because morality did not need to be restricted by rules and regulations. It existed everywhere with living beings, regardless of whether they were mortals or cultivators. No matter what realm you're in, morality is forever, and it's absolutely indispensable. It was the cornerstone of order. Fate was the same. The Tao Lord of Destiny felt that fate should be returned to every single living being, and it should be controlled by them and not be controlled by others. It doesn't matter if you have good intentions or bad intentions. There were conditions for the two of them to come to the lower realm, never to return. If they were re-established, they would automatically revive. Do you think anyone would want the two of them to come back? This time, Lu Xiaoyi was truly stunned. These two old fellows are really good at pretending. You don't say. It makes a lot of sense. Morality and fate really shouldn't have universal standards. There shouldn't be any restrictions. Anne 11, don't tell me there are other innate Tao Lords who do the same? Anne 11 shook her head. No, there are all kinds of reasons. It's also because these two innate Taos have a unique nature. It's also because they truly followed the will of the heavens. Of course, it's also because of Sanhong's bad habit of limiting their own conditions before their Taos collapsed. It was indeed a bad habit. It meant that he didn't want it and didn't want others to want it. Anne 11 smiled. Before the Tao of Destiny collapsed, it gave me the same feeling. Therefore, I won't choose fate. I'll choose misfortune. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi praised. Good. Very good. Misfortune really needs to be restricted by rules and regulations. There was too much information. It made him a little confused and even destroyed the basis of many of his plans. For example, he needed a new perspective to consider the reset of the innate Taos and the combination of some of his Taos. Anne 11 was an experienced person after all. She guessed what he was thinking. You don't have to worry. The Tao of morality and fate is gone, but the Tao of morality and fate is eternal. There's no doubt about that. Therefore, your creations based on these two Taos won't be affected much. However, you can't impose your own morals on others anymore. You can't easily control others' fates. Or, you can use misfortune as a replacement. If I'm lucky enough to succeed in the Tao unification stage one day, on account of our relationship, I guarantee that misfortune will always follow you. Lu Xiaoyi shook his hands. Anne 11, please spare me. My weak body won't be able to withstand your torture. The topic started to lighten up. It couldn't always be heavy. The universe was huge, and this responsibility wasn't something that one or two people could shoulder alone. Little E, other than meeting your little friend, what other requests do you have for coming to the Phoenix Nest? Lu Xiaoyi didn't stand on ceremony. They were all family, and he had already called her aunt. And there are two other reasons. One is to ask the Phoenix race about the Tao of the Five Luck. Now that fate is gone, misfortune, interception, luck, and luck are still there. I want to know more about them. This is very important to me. As for the other reason, I haven't seen the Nirvana Tao fragment before. Do you have any way to get it? Anne 11 smiled. Regarding the Five Luck, I will answer your questions. Although the Phoenix race is small in number, we are proficient in each of the 5 Luck Taos. I will remove your misfortune, and the other sisters will remove your interception, luck, and luck. This isn't a problem. Then, in the process, we can slowly search for the Nirvana Tao fragment. You know that the Phoenix race doesn't care much about this. This Nirvana is different from the Nirvana Tao fragment. Lu Xiaoyi bowed and thanked her. He knew what Anne 11 meant. The Nirvana Tao of the Phoenix and the Nirvana Tao of Buddhism were different things. They couldn't be treated the same. She wasn't trying to find an excuse. The ice crystal world around the Wutong tree was the best place to comprehend. The cultivators here rarely had any distracting thoughts. The environment didn't allow it. It was as if their souls were cleansed and spotless. This was a rare opportunity. Not only did he have to learn the Tao of the 5 Luck Taos, he also had to summarize the recent news to determine his future direction. He had this kind of strength. He never became arrogant because of his self-confidence. Instead, he learned from the strengths of others and constantly adjusted his direction. This news came at the right time. It was much better than finding out that he couldn't change his direction. Chapter 21-24. Lu Xiaoyi stayed in this ice crystal world for a long time. He felt that he had never been so calm in his life. The ice crystal world seemed to be able to cleanse one's soul, get rid of impatience, and purify one's thoughts. However, he also knew that he couldn't stay in this place for long. Otherwise, he would become an existence like the phoenixes sooner or later. Wouldn't it be awkward if he didn't have the lifespan of a phoenix? In this place, he had several teachers. Light 11 taught misfortune, Hu Junyang taught destiny, Wei Wunyang taught destiny, Sun Ernyang taught interception. In fact, they were half teacher and half friend. This process was also an opportunity for the phoenixes to come into contact with other great Taos, a way to come into contact with human cultivators' thoughts. Learning was mutual, especially for their level. When he was free, he would play hide-and-seek with the little smoky phoenix in the grotesque and variegated ice crystal world, but he would not involve himself in anything else. In this kind of environment, even his desires have been frozen. Of course, it was also very unsuitable for the current situation of both sides. He finally found his wife and lost her forever. From the moment Han Yin turned from a peacock into a phoenix, this was destined. In fact, there were no secrets to speak of in the phoenix nest. The huge Wutong tree was a huge nebula that had been slowly transformed by the Phoenix clan for countless years. It was originally a gas nebula, but due to the extreme cold, it had turned into a world of crystal flowers. In this place, the Phoenix race didn't care about its so-called function. It was meaningless. For a race whose numbers couldn't exceed 2 hands, wherever they flew, that was their home. The learning of Tao Realm was very smooth. To Lu Xiaoyi, who had mastered more than 10 Tao Realms, the characteristics of 10,000 arts returned to 1 were becoming more and more obvious. It was always difficult at the beginning, and he needed to start from the beginning. However, once he got into the rhythm and had a foundation, with more than 10 Tao Realms as his foundation, there was nothing that could really stop him. This process became more obvious as he progressed. After he successfully understood more than 20 innate great Taos, he might not need great Tao fragments for the remaining great Taos. This was good news. At least, in the last period of the universe's chaos, before the change of era, he didn't need to search for fragments all over the world. This also solved the difficulty of learning Tao realm. 10,000 arts returned to one, the essence converged. Under the commonality, seeking common ground while reserving differences became very simple. In other words, learning all 36 Taos was not as difficult as one might think, as long as one could make a perfect start. He had done it. The most difficult stage had passed, and now it was time to reap the rewards. When his state of mind had completely calmed down, when all the pressure was getting heavier and heavier, when the danger of the immortal court of the upper realm loomed, pressuring him to the point of suffocation and making him feel as if he would collapse at any time, the turning point had quietly begun. His study of the great Tao was also the key to stopping him from advancing further. The shackles were loosened, and he was suddenly enlightened. This was the reward for his perseverance. He was worthy of this great gift from the heavenly Tao. Therefore, in addition to learning, he began to put more energy into the great Tao of innovation. Stars, balance, devouring, and heavenly tribulation. Among them, he still insisted on creating his own Tao of stars and Tao of balance. These were things that truly belonged to him. He wouldn't change his mind just because of someone else's guidance. This was the basic quality of a great Tao cultivator. He was still researching Devour because it was really useful. Moreover, he also had a unique learning condition in this aspect. He was proficient in 6 of the 7 cornerstones of the 5 grand virtues and a unification of slaughter. If he didn't learn it, wouldn't it be a waste? Moreover, this Tao state had a unique effect in cooperation with the flying sword. It was directly effective in improving one's combat strength. This was the foundation of a swordsman. In the future changes, battles were inevitable. No matter how one planned in the early stages, one still had to rely on the flying sword in the end. He was very clear about this point. The great Tao of heavenly tribulation was formed by the combination of fate, life and death, unification and reincarnation. In theory, he could work on this aspect, but his foundation was not solid enough. He should not learn for the sake of learning. Instead, he should make a decision after these 4 foundations were firmly established. This was from a technical perspective. On the level of conspiracy, the Crow ancestor used the heavenly fox Chi-Chi's mouth to convey the 2 great Taos. His meaning was very clear. He didn't want the descendants of Xian Yuan to have any achievements in this aspect. This was because in the final stage of the change of the era, no one could hide the new great Tao that everyone created. These 2 great Taos that subverted the traditional order would definitely cause the founder and the orthodoxy behind him to suffer a crazy counterattack from the conservative forces. The Xian Yuan sword faction might not be able to withstand it. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care about himself, but what about the dome? It was because he fully understood the Crow ancestors' unspoken words that he sold Devour to the Buddhist army monks. Next, he would find another target to sell heavenly tribulation to the Orthodox Taoists. These 2 sects were incomparably huge and had thick skin. They could withstand the pressure of being crushed. They were the most suitable to subvert the tradition. Moreover, it would be beneficial for everyone's relationship after the new immortal court was established in the future. The Buddhists devoured the great Tao, while the Taoist heavenly tribulation struck the immortals. Everyone was in danger and trembled in fear. What a beautiful scene it was. It was a perfect balance. His plan began to become clear. After nearly 3,000 years, he had successfully changed his interest from rolling up his sleeves and personally participating in a fight to inciting others to fight while he acted as the mediator. He didn't know if this was an improvement or not, or was he retreating? But there was one thing he was very clear about. Fighters were the lowest level in the Tao battle. One level above them was the arbiter, and the highest was the rule maker. He couldn't always be in the role of a shirtless fighter. In the ice crystal world of the Phoenix Nest, he slowly figured out his future direction. This was a very crucial decision that could ensure that he didn't take a detour or stray from the path. The beautiful immortal court was his home. The Taoists and Buddhists fought with all their might. A true gentleman who watched a game of chess but didn't speak was praised by everyone. This was his goal. It was full of the smell of malicious shit. Of course, He had never thought of it that way. He felt that this was a kind of virtuous, competitive, and lively cultivation environment where the great Tao devoured each other, and immortals could be struck by lightning at any time. This was a truly good cultivation environment. Only in this way could the people below have a path to walk. This was a normal metabolism. On this day, just as he was thinking in peace, he felt that the originally quiet ice, crystal world suddenly became deathly silent. It was as if even the light and shadow of time had stopped. There was an inexplicable sound of shattering. Pa 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 pa, 4 sounds. Misfortune, interception, destiny, and destiny. The 4 great Taos shattered one after another. The 5 great Taos were like this. First, one great Tao shattered. Then, at a certain point in time, the remaining 4 great Taos shattered one after another. The current 5 great Taos were the same. Destiny collapsed too early. The others were forcefully holding on. Now that they couldn't hold on anymore, they were all wiped out. In that case, would the 5 great Taos be the same? The Taos had already descended to the lower realm. Would the remaining 4 be the same and collapse at a certain point in time? Chapter 21-25. Madame 11 called him over. Little E, your chance might be here. Lu Xiaoyi had a hunch. You mean, those fragments? Madame 11 nodded. You've been here for 100 years. You've mentioned your request for the Nirvana fragments, but we can't do anything about it. Nirvana's nature is different, and we don't have the habit of keeping them. But with the collapse of the 5 fates, there's a chance. The chance lies in the road of no return, not here. Madame 11 explained, there are 4 holes in the universe, the black hole, white hole, wormhole, and gray hole. They represent the inner and outer scenic skies and the road of no return. The last wormhole is the road of no return. Lu Xiaoyi frowned. Wormhole? Isn't that the passage connecting the black hole and white hole? Is it the passage connecting the inner and outer scenic skies? I think I've been there before. It's in the splendid heaven and earth of the main world. Is it that place? Why do people say that the road of no return is close to the phoenix nest? Are they referring to the same passage? Madame 11 shook her head. Wormholes are different from the other 3 types of universe holes. They're not unique. In other words, there are many wormholes connecting the black hole and white hole, but only one of them is connected to the splendid heaven and earth you've been to before. It's called the living wormhole. Most of them are dead holes. Due to various reasons, they've lost their effectiveness during the changes of the universe. The real situation is that a living wormhole can't be used after a long time, just like a human's blood vessels. But the connection between the black hole and white hole is necessary, so new wormholes are created. The new wormholes are the living ones, and the ones that have been abandoned are the dead ones. Since the creation of the universe, this process has been going on, so there are more and more dead holes. Only the newly created ones are connected. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly had a thought. What if the new wormhole can't be opened in time? Or what happens if it's not successful? Madame 11 said bluntly, then the black hole will explode from absorbing too much, and the white hole will wither and die from spitting out too much. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes, just like a person's mouth and anus. There must be intestines connecting them. Anne 11 was stunned. This analogy was very appropriate, although it was a little vulgar. However, most of the people from Xianyuan were like this. You couldn't expect them to suddenly become elegant. Most of these dead holes that have been abandoned due to blockage will eventually collapse due to the erosion of time and return to the void of the main world. However, there were also some dead holes that, for some special reasons, continue to exist. For example, the path known as the Road of No Return was because it formed its own cycle in the void. It seemed to be blocked, but not blocked. If it was completely blocked, it could still pass through certain energy properties. If it was not blocked, it could not satisfy the energy exchange between the black hole and the white hole. This is a natural state. At one end of the wormhole, there's a large-scale liquid flow that draws out the chaotic space, while at the other end, there's an extremely cold environment. Lu Xiaoyi completely understood. If this was explained scientifically, it was a refrigeration cycle. The evaporation of liquid could absorb heat from the surrounding environment. The other end of the wormhole was dissipating heat, and the airspace near the phoenix nest was absorbing heat. Thus, such an extremely cold environment was formed. In other words, this dead wormhole had become a super-efficient space air conditioner. The secrets of the universe were truly wonderful beyond words. If his guess was correct, the so-called road of no return was in the air conditioner tube, an endless cycle. Gas to liquid, releasing heat. Liquid to gas, absorbing heat. Expansion and reduction of pressure. Condensation and recovery, bringing the heat from one place to another. And 11 continued. In this half-dead hole, because of the drastic changes in the internal environment, it is very easy to bring in the great Tao fragments that pass by. Once you enter, you can never come out. This is the most reliable place to obtain the great Tao fragments. Among the human cultivators, there are very few orthodoxies who know this secret. Only the true orthodoxies know this secret. Thus, every time a great Tao fragment collapses, the half-immortal elites of these orthodoxies will gather here and compete for it. This includes our Phoenix clan. Lu Xiaoyi was surprised. And 11, didn't you guys not care about these great Tao fragments? Why did you get involved in this mess? Those human cultivators are so anxious that they don't care if you are the king of beasts or not. Ant 11 sighed. Do you think we want to? We're not going in for the great Tao fragments. We are afraid that these humans will destroy this half-dead wormhole, and the ice crystal world near the phoenix nest will no longer exist. Lu Xiaoyi understood. That was indeed the case. When the human cultivators fought, they would not care about the natural environment here. Who would it affect? Ant 11 smiled bitterly. In the past, without the great Tao fragments collapsing, very few people were willing to enter such an extreme environment like the half-dead wormhole. It did not affect us much, but it is different now. With the great Tao fragments, these humans are becoming more and more unrestrained. If we do not maintain order, it will be difficult to ensure the wormhole's integrity. This situation is becoming more and more serious, and we are investing more and more people. We are helpless. So, little E, after you go in, not only do you have to collect the fragments yourself, you also have to help us maintain order. What could Lu Xiaoyi say? A favor that couldn't be pushed away, a never-ending battle. When would he become a ruler of order? This was not because he was tired of it, but because he was amazed by the ingenuity of the world. It is my duty to contribute to the Phoenix clan. But Ant 11, let me say this in advance. Since you invited me, how I control and how I kill is not up to me. Once my flying sword is out, even I can't control it. He said it very vaguely, but what he actually meant was, you don't have to care about what I do. Otherwise, I might as well not do it. Ant 11 sighed again. How could she not know about the bad habits of swordsmen? That person had been like this since the beginning of the battle. Once the battle began, they would not listen to anyone. How they fought and how they killed was up to them. There was nothing to complain about. The top swordsman had such a privilege. The phoenix nest did not have to be here. As long as the clan existed, where would they not build their nest? But after millions of years, the Phoenix clan had long been used to the cold and quiet here. How could they find the same space in such a short period of time? Therefore, although they did not care about it logically, they were unwilling to abandon it out of habit. If the wormhole did not change after the change of era, without the great Tao fragments collapsing, it would become the same isolated place as before. A few thousand years was nothing to the Phoenix clan. Lu Xiaoyi came up with a bad idea. I know that the Phoenix clan does not want to be accused of colluding with humans in private. But when it comes to battle, some things can't be cared so much. How about this, Ant 11? You mobilize 2nd Ant, 5th Ant, and 9th Ant to get some Phoenix feathers. Once I put them on my body, no one will be able to tell. Chapter 21-26. Ant 11 didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How can that be the same? As long as you flap your wings, people will know that you are a fake bird. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. You don't know, do you? Too bureaucratic. In these 100 years, I don't know how many times I and Han Yin have flown. Without boasting or using escape techniques, I just rely on my wings to move. Han Yin can't even touch a single feather of mine. It's just that the phoenix feathers are too rare. It's not something that can be faked. An 11 was speechless. This little guy's eyesight was very accurate. He had seen through their concerns. As the kings of 10,000 beasts, it was not good for them to be too close to humans. In this chaotic era, they would set a very bad example for the immemorial beasts and demonic beasts below. This was why they were hesitant. All right, I'll try to ask. On the parasol tree, other than me and Han Yin, who else is willing to pluck your feathers? We can't pluck too many phoenix feathers. The two of us can't make up your entire body. Fortunately, Lu Xiaoyi, who had always been sweet and well-behaved, obtained the support of the phoenixes. In fact, it was also helping themselves. According to the previous situation, every time a fragment of the Great Tao collapsed, there would be more than 10 half-immortals from various orthodoxies gathered in the road of no return. As the management of the inner and outer scenic sky became more and more lax, there were more and more half-immortals in the lower realm. In addition, this time, for fragments of the Great Tao collapsed at once. It was certain that the number of human half-immortals would be close to 50. This was not something that could be maintained by a few phoenixes. The phoenixes were the kings of 10,000 beasts, not only because they were few in number and extremely powerful, but also because of their innate divine ability, disdain. This was the kind of pressure that only worked among the beasts. This ability made them invincible among the beasts, and no beast could stand in their way. However, when confronting humans, disdain was useless. Therefore, the difference in strength was not as great as when facing a group of beasts. Although their ability was still above the human half-immortals of the same realm, it was more limited. They could deal with 2 or 3 at the same time without any problem. If there were more, they might not be able to move freely. Among the phoenixes on the Wudong tree, 2nd ant, 5th ant, 9th ant, and 11th ant were the strongest. They were all in the half-immortal realm. There are also a few other phoenixes, all of them at the true monarch realm. There was even a little Yuanying phoenix like Han Yin. Phoenixes possessed endless lifespan, powerful mystical powers, and exceptional strength. But in the upper realm, they couldn't avoid the common problem of archaic beasts. They were too slow. The higher their strength, the more this was the case. Based on this calculation, even if the 4 great phoenixes went, they would still be too weak to deal with the 50 human half-immortals. As long as everyone obeyed the rules and didn't cross the line, it would still be fine. However, once they started fighting because of something, the phoenixes would be unable to cope with it. Now that the end of the epic was approaching, the pressure on the cultivators would increase, and their behavior would become more extreme. It was unlikely that they would be able to complete the fight for the fragments peacefully. This was the reason why the phoenixes invited Lu Xiaoyi to participate. He was strong, had a close relationship, and was only one person. It would be very difficult for others to realize that he was the external aid that the phoenixes had invited. Every proud race loved face. Inviting an outsider meant admitting that they were not good enough. This was something that the phoenixes couldn't tolerate. Therefore, when he opened his mouth and asked for feathers, everyone cooperated and discussed with each other. You plucked the feathers from the left wing. I plucked the feathers from the right wing. Some plucked the feathers from the belly. Some plucked the feathers from the back. Some plucked the feathers from the head. And some plucked the feathers from the tail. In any case, the 9 phoenixes managed to gather a complete set for him. This was the first time in the phoenixes' several million years of history that something like this had happened. There was no other reason. They didn't treat Lu Xiaoyi as an outsider. In any case, he could be considered as half a son-in-law. Han Yin was responsible for giving him the feathers. However, before she touched the feathers, he needed to transform a little. Transforming was also a very important aspect of a cultivator's ability. Lu Xiaoyi even considered whether this thing could possibly become an innate great Tao in the future. The Tao of transformation was easy for a half-immortal, but it was also very difficult. It all depended on how you transformed. If you were similar in form but not in spirit, then Lu Xiaoyi could also transform into all things. However, no matter what he transformed into, he couldn't break away from the swordsman's essence. Even if he transformed into a rabbit, it would be a rabbit that could spit out flying swords. It was fine if he didn't make a move, but once he made a move, he would be exposed. The true transformation was to transform into anything. Not only did it have to be similar in form, it also had to be similar in spirit. For example, if he transformed into a phoenix, not only did he have to have the same appearance, he also had to know their innate divine ability, disdain. This was very difficult. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't do it. In fact, he hadn't seen any other half-immortal who could do it. The reason was actually very simple. Humans were the leader of all living beings. Their cultivation, combat skills, habits, and characteristics were all based on their stinky skin. No matter what they turned into, they could only turn into something lower. That would be meaningless. They would put themselves in danger for no reason, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Therefore, although the Tao of transformation was very high-end, very few people practiced it. Only those immortals who had successfully ascended to immortality had a lot of time to study this great Tao. For the cultivators of the origin world, they first had to consider the problem of how to reach the upper realm. They didn't want to transform into a bird, a wild boar, or a tiger. It wasn't like they were in a circus. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi asked for the phoenix feathers. In the Tao of transformation, the higher the level of the beast, the harder it was to transform. It was easy to transform into a snake or a beast, but if you wanted to transform into a phoenix, you wouldn't even be able to transform into a phoenix's feathers, let alone the phoenix's divine ability. Lu Xiaoyi could only first transform into an appearance that was 70 or 80% similar to the phoenix, and then let the little phoenix correct him. Little E, you look like a phoenix, but you don't know the phoenix's skills. Once you open your mouth and spit out a sword pill, everything will be exposed. What's the point? The little phoenix complained that he was overestimating himself. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. The feathers are long, but your knowledge is short, right? Why would I open my mouth and spit out a sword pill? I can shoot out swords from all over my body. I can shoot them from my anus, and they're even poisonous. I can use all of your phoenix's feather-flinging attacks. I'm just using a flying sword to simulate the shooting of feathers. What's so difficult about that? In the worst case, I can still get close. Although I don't have a long sword, I still have claws. A swordsman at my level, my swordsmanship has long broken through the limits of having a sword or not. Even if I use my tongue, do you believe that I can use swordsmanship? The little phoenix curled its lips. Believe. You're just bragging, right? You were able to do it when you built your foundation. Isn't this your talent? It circled around Lu Xiaoyi 3 times, guiding him on where he should be thinner and where he should be fatter. The phoenix's feathers were very dense, and Lu Xiaoyi had never seen a white-cut phoenix, so the details were not satisfactory. For example, how long should the neck be stretched to match the body? The claws were too long. They needed to be retracted a little. The details of the buttocks? The tail cone? There were countless small problems. Finally, the little phoenix's face turned red. Lu Xiaoyi, can't you retract that thing? Do you think it looks good just like that? Chapter 21-27. Lu Xiaoyi was also very helpless. That place is my weak spot. It can't be changed. Usually, it can only become bigger or smaller, but it can't disappear. The little phoenix was fuming, but she was quite familiar with this thing. After all, they had been husband and wife for a long time. It's too ugly. Do you want to chop it off? You can grow it back after we're done. Lu Xiaoyi was shocked. Even if it doesn't work, it's still my little ancestor. Heads can be broken and blood can flow, but a man can't lose his dignity. How about we put some glue on it first? The little phoenix muttered and was very dissatisfied with helping him deal with these small details. Lu Xiaoyi was still not at ease and instructed, stick it firmly. Flying will be very intense during the battle. Don't open the glue and throw it out. I'm a flying sword cultivator, not a staff cultivator. The little phoenix was very meticulous and very careful. Her feathers were fixed firmly one by one, afraid that during the battle, the astral wind would wreak havoc and cause her feathers to fall off. However, this was not a problem. During the battle, with the astral wind protecting his body and conscious control, how could Lu Xiaoyi lose a single strand of hair with his ability? It was just flirting. They spent an entire day like this. When Lu Xiaoyi and the little phoenix flew to the front of the few big phoenixes, they did not dare to believe it. Not only the appearance, but the flapping of the wings was very elegant and extraordinary. A feeling of a sovereign descending to the world spontaneously arose. Feeling everyone's surprise, Lu Xiaoyi was very proud. In his Niwen Sparrow Palace, he had seen this thing flapping its wings for thousands of years. How could he not learn this rhythm? N11 was very satisfied. With this guy here, they could fight against 1,000,000 soldiers. She instructed, "You all look after the parasol tree. If there are any accidents, just leave. There's nothing to fight about. Everything will wait for us to come back." The little phoenixes nodded in agreement. A group of 5 phoenixes, 4 real and 1 fake, disappeared without a trace. Among the 5 phoenixes, N11 and Sun Enyang were both peak half-immortal. Hu Jianyang, Wei Wunyang, and Lu Xiaonyang were all first-step half-immortal. This lineup could not be said to be weak, but N11 was still very cautious. Little E, do not underestimate those half-immortals who have come to the point of no return. These were the true elites of the orthodoxies. They were the supreme seeds that the sects had high hopes for. They were the tides that would change the epoch in the future. Behind them were the most powerful forces in the universe, with the longest inheritances and the deepest foundations of orthodoxies. As far as they were concerned, their ancient techniques were definitely at Severance 1 or 2, and their blight realms were definitely at 4th or 5th blight. Therefore, they couldn't be careless. Even if we were to fight against them, it wouldn't be like what the rumors say. At most, it would be 1 against 2. The reason they were able to control the situation in the past was because they didn't want to provoke the disgust of the primeval beast clan, so they had some misgivings in their hearts. However, no one can guarantee that they will continue to restrain themselves like this. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I understand. If I can persuade him, I will. If I can, I will. I won't use force unless I have no other choice. N11 was very satisfied. At least in terms of attitude, this little guy was very modest. She was afraid that he would reveal his true colors once they started fighting. Because we don't participate in the fight for fragments, the human half-immortals know that we are only the guardians of order. What we care about is the safety of the point of no return and whether or not they will affect the operation of the point of no return when they use their techniques. Therefore, at least in the beginning, no one will take the initiative to make an enemy out of us. Little E, you also need fragments. I won't stop you, but you have to do it secretly. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Don't worry, we are all veterans. We know what to do. I guarantee that we will do it secretly. If we take something, we will have to throw the blame out. N11 tried her best to give him a general impression. In the point of no return, the risk was not small. Phoenixes could be reborn from the ashes, but Lu Xiaoyi's rebirth could be broken by others. Usually, in a fight for fragments like this, it will develop into a confrontation between various groups. There are groups like the Taoist and Buddhist circles, the 4 symbols of the universe, the inner and outer scenic circles, and so on. We don't have to be anxious. We can offend one group, but never fight against everyone. That is not our purpose here. N11 was a little naggy, but Lu Xiaoyi just listened quietly and did not show any impatience. She only nagged because she cared about you. Otherwise, she would not say a word and let you comprehend and die. At his level, there were not many opportunities to listen to others nagging. Every time the fragments and the point of no return are divided, there will be leftovers. This place is very strange. When fewer cultivators enter, these fragments will hide without a trace. When more cultivators enter and new fragments enter, they will come out to join in the fun. Therefore, little E, you actually have a chance to encounter a nirvana fragment here. It all depends on your luck. I didn't say it before because I knew it would be useless even if you went in. Looking for it alone is like looking for a needle in a haystack. But now that there are new fragments, a group of cultivators entering is the best chance. Lu Xiaoyi expressed his gratitude. He was still a step away from nirvana and the five fates. He still needed fragments to improve, but this process would not be long. When he gathered all 24 great Daos, the universe would enter the later stage of chaos. With his vast understanding of the great Daos, he would not need fragments to help him understand the remaining 12 great Daos. Now, it was the final hurdle. After this period, he would not have to worry about understanding the great Daos anymore. Sun Ernyang's attention was on other things. Little E, don't keep the tip of your claws extended. It is the habit of the phoenix race, and actually the habit of all birds, to keep it normally and only pop it out when needed. Hu Junyang also said, Little E, your movement of flapping your wings is perfect. Even we can't find anything wrong with it. But you have to wave your tail a little. Don't be so stiff and timid. Wei Wunyang said, Little, the phoenix's head must always be held high. This is our pride. You did well, but you have to pay attention to the angle. If you wave it too high, it will look like you have a stiff pillow. Also, the phoenix's supernatural power is disdainful. Disdainful means intimidating. If your gaze is not intimidating, then it is filled with ferocity. Under the guidance of a few large phoenixes, Lu Xiaoyi finally adjusted his state. His claws were easy to handle. He just had to keep them. Intimidating was not easy, because in his nearly 3,000 years of cultivation, he either had a wretched smile, a ferocious look, a lustful look, or a fake smile. But there were times when he did not have an intimidating aura. Even in his short career as a sect leader, he did not cultivate such an aura. Forget it. Intimidating is intimidating. It's better than being cheap. Just An 11 sighed. How could a person's temperament be changed so easily? But the most difficult part was how to shake his butt. Either he shook it too much, or it was too mechanical. It did not have the charm to match his wings. He could not be blamed. In the Sparrow Palace, he only saw wings. Where did he see a butt? The more he twisted it, the uglier it looked. He might as well not twist it. In the end, even the strict Hu Jianyang had to give up. Forget it. You should just pretend to be paralyzed. At least it will look more natural. Chapter 21-28. The phoenix nest was very close to the road of no return. Actually, Lu Xiaoyi didn't need to lead the way as he already knew where to go. He just needed to fly to the coldest place, which was the air conditioner. The temperature here was close to the extreme, more than negative 300 degrees Celsius. However, because of the phoenix feathers on his body, he didn't feel it that strongly. To a demi-immortal, such an extreme environment only stimulated them to circulate the elemental energy in their body. The five phoenixes rushed into the road of no return. Lu Xiaoyi immediately felt that there was something different about this place. The temperature was no longer that low, but there was an unknown liquid mist coming at them at an extremely high speed. This liquid mist would expand rapidly after rushing out of the road of no return, taking away the heat and creating coldness. They were going against the current. There are no traces of humans here. An 11 had already reminded him that human cultivators would usually enter from the other side of the wormhole. Both sides would only come into contact with each other at the center of the wormhole. That was also the place where the fragments of the Great Path were most likely to be concentrated. These Great Path fairies also seemed to like to join in the fun. They wouldn't appear alone, but they preferred to move in groups. In the void of the universe outside, they didn't have the chance to meet each other, but it was different here. An 11 and Sun Ernyang flew at the front, while he hid behind them and poked his head out to look around. According to the rules that were agreed upon beforehand, when the human demi-immortal cultivators had a dispute, An 11 would come forward to resolve it. He couldn't interrupt. This was a necessary precaution. Otherwise, with his stinky mouth, He wouldn't be able to say a few words, and he would be full of hatred. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. He was more concerned about the environment here. Although it was called a wormhole, it was relative to the void of the universe. To humans, it wasn't a wormhole. It was an extremely wide space corridor, enough for fighting and moving. This place was a fiery nebula. The burning nebula was a very common celestial phenomenon in the void of the universe. It was usually seen within a certain distance from a star. Because it was burned by the star all year round and was pulled by the star's huge gravitational force, it formed such a nebula phenomenon. It would burn through the nebula and burn it into particles before being sucked back to the star's surface. It was a predestined result. It was only a matter of time. In the fiery nebula, the temperature could easily reach a few hundred degrees. Cultivators whose realms were not high enough had to stay away. Yuanying did not dare to come in, and even Jinjuan had to be extra careful. Only the half-immortal body could go in and out freely. It was because they had completely grasped the Tao state, not because their bodies were resistant. However, the fiery nebula was different. There were no stars around it that could generate enough heat. The nearest stellar giant was very far away, and its heat was almost undetectable to humans. The burning nebula here was caused by something else. The temperature was not as high as the normal burning nebula, either. It was a weakened version of the celestial phenomenon, but it was still a forbidden land for human cultivators and cultivators. No one was willing to come in casually because spiritual opportunity would not even be generated here. However, the strange thing was that in this burning nebula, there were many figures of cultivators moving about. There were dozens of them, and it was as if they were holding a ceremony inside, moving about randomly. There were 3 figures traveling together, and one of them was complaining. From the looks of it, we've come to the right place. But there are a little too many people. Moreover, most of them are old monsters at the 4th, 5th, and 2nd severance. Ma Bailu, look at the place you've led us to. They don't even use coffins and directly cremate them. That's quite convenient. Another voice said, I didn't beg you to come either. I only secretly told Senior Sister because we're all in the 5th ring and it's not good to eat alone. Senior Sister is kind-hearted and can't bear to drag you in, but you're still complaining here. If you're afraid of death, then hurry up and leave. There's still time now. The 5th ring Supreme Mountain Gate is the safest. Dig a deep hole and bury yourself in it. The last was a female voice, and she was very impatient. All right, are you done yet? I've been listening to you two the whole way. So annoying. There are many seniors here, and we can't be rash. However, we're not to be trifled with, either. If we really get into a conflict, who's afraid of whom? It's a pity that little E isn't here. Otherwise, we might as well take over the entire 5th ring. These 3 people were the 3 half-immortals from the 5th ring, Qing Xian, Shi Shi, and Yen Sheng. After several hundred years, they each had their own fortuitous encounters. They were the most outstanding seeds of this era, so it was natural for them to reach the upper level. Now, Shi Shi and Yen Sheng had both successfully reached the upper level of Yang spirit. Qing Xian was the strangest. His Yang spirit could not advance, but like the bamboo hat he held high, he became a 2nd severance primordial spirit. The 3 of them each had their own gains, and had successfully taken a step forward on the great path. Naturally, like Lu Xiaoyi, they began to consider the problem of creating a new great Tao. They were not the only ones. This was a problem that almost every half-immortal had to consider. The higher one's ambition, the greater their achievements. If you didn't even dare to think about it, how could you become an immortal? If you wanted to create a new great Tao, you had to be well-versed in the concept of the great Tao. You couldn't say that you were proficient in it, but at the very least, you had to have a basic understanding of it. This was because the new great Tao was also built on the original 36 innate great Taos, and had completely covered all aspects of cultivation. It was just that in the new era, there would be a new great Tao that was more compatible with the new era. This time, the collapse of the 4 fates was a good opportunity to capture a fragment of the great Tao. The three pure ones indeed had a deep foundation. The details of the road of no return were not a secret to the three pure ones of the fifth ring. Of course, as one of the seeds of the orthodoxy, Qing Xian had the right to come and fight for it. He was not one to eat alone, and he also understood that in this era, he could not bear all the responsibility alone. Since Lu Xiaoyi could not find it, he could only inform his senior sister, Yin Cheng. For him, there was no such thing as danger. Everyone had reached this level, so there was no need to differentiate between men and women, who needed someone to take care of them. As a result, the 3-5 ring half celestial realm cultivators gathered together. Originally, they thought that with their strength, they would be able to do whatever they wanted in this place. However, when they entered the Fire Nebula, they discovered that not only were there more people than they had imagined, but they were also stronger than they had imagined. How could the three of them be people who would retreat? Some complaints were just the way they got along. If that stick was there, they would be the loudest complaint. However, this did not affect their determination to go in. Can't we go in now? Among the three of them, Yanqing actually knew the least about this. This was the fundamental difference between the sword vein and the Dharma vein. It was not completely because she was ignorant. She explained, "Senior sister, don't worry. The fragments of the great Tao have collapsed, and it will take time to fly here. The more time we wait, the more fragments of the great Tao will go in. It will be easier to divide them. Otherwise, with these people, sooner or later, their brains will be beaten to a pulp. Now that more people have gone in, the fragments of the great Tao will not go in. They are very spiritual. So you see, these old monsters are hanging around outside and not going in. This is the reason. It is not good for us to take the lead, so we should just follow behind them. Otherwise, they will think that we do not know the rules and attack us." He knew no less than Qing Xian. So the real situation was that both of them had informed Yin Cheng, but did not communicate with each other. This was the typical style of the orthodox Taoist. Chapter 21-29. The three of them waited while secretly observing the old monsters. Unfortunately, they didn't find any familiar ones. The universe was too big, and there were too many capable people. How could it be so coincidental for a senior to appear here? After a month, the situation changed. At the highest temperature of the Fire Nebula, the old monsters began to gather. This might mean the beginning. How did they determine that the Great Path fragments have entered the path of no return? We are guarding here, but why didn't I feel any Great Path fragments passing through? Is it experience or a special method? Yin Cheng asked. In terms of Tao state perception, the sword vein was not as good as the Dharma meridian. Of course, except for some monsters. She spread out his hands. I don't know. I didn't feel it either. Or is it experience? It's not the first time they came here. Qing Xian said slowly. Knowledge needs to be learned and accumulated continuously. Knowledge won't fall from the sky for nothing. Broaden your horizons and make more preparations before you go. Don't take it for granted and make a shameless guess. The Great Path fragments of the path of no return. Who says that they will definitely enter from the entrance like humans? If they really enter from here, how many fragments can they enter? The wormhole is long and endless. The space it exists in will directly absorb fragments from the wormhole wall. So although we didn't feel it, it doesn't mean that those fragments won't enter. It's just like entering the bridal chamber. Some people are officially married and enter with the beating of gongs and drums. Some sneak in the middle of the night by breaking the lock. Some dig a hole and sneak in. There are even some who have already stripped naked and waited on the bed. There are countless ways. Can you imagine it based on experience? She glared. If I didn't look at people, I would think that the one who is talking nonsense is little Lu. If you know, just know. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Are you uncomfortable without insulting people first? After hanging around with little Lu for so long, you didn't learn anything good. You are stained with all those bad habits. Where is the dignity of the three pure ones? Yanqing's mouth wasn't soft at all. After hanging around with these people for so long, he was at a disadvantage. You two can fight all you want, But can you stop bringing little E into the picture? As if all your bad habits were taught by me, Xian Yuan. When Xiaoyi enters the bridal chamber, she must have stripped naked and waited on the bed early in the morning. Shi, you are just a burrower. You don't even have the courage to sneak in and pick the lock. As for Ma Bailu, you're just someone who's been watching from the window for a while. The three of them taunted each other to buy time. This was indeed their first time doing something like this. Although they were bold and reckless, they still knew when they should not do something. Shi counted with his fingers. Excluding us, there are a total of 31 people. Among them, 25 were in the Blight realm, 6 were in the 5th Blight, and 19 were in the 4th Blight. As for the other 6 ancient techniques, they were all at the 2nd Severance. But I don't think all of them are from interior heaven. Smokey smiled. It seems like the three of us are the only ones who have just taken this step. I was wondering why those monsters didn't come. So he probably knows the qualifications to enter this place, so he doesn't dare to come? Qing Xian sneered. He doesn't even dare to come. How can he be considered a demon? Shi sighed. It must be a reminder from the orthodoxy. Just like me, actually, I was also warned by my sect. This place is temporarily not a place that I can set foot in at my level. If it weren't for worrying about the two of you, I wouldn't have come here to get involved in this mess. Qing Xian humphed coldly. Speak human. When has a supreme orthodoxy like yours ever put yourself in danger because of your friends? Then it must be because there are benefits to be gained. Why don't you not reach out to take the shards after you enter and focus on the two of us first? Shi laughed dryly. Since we're already here, it wouldn't be good not to reach out, right? Let others think that I'm pretending to be virtuous here. That's not good. I'd better follow the crowd, right? Smokey looked at these two hypocrites and was really somewhat speechless. Of course, she also knew that this place was not suitable for them now. There were countless monsters in the interior and exterior heaven. Either their background was not enough and did not know the news, or they had been warned by their sect elders. Those who came here were all peak stage half-immortals, and there were too many monks and too little porridge. It would be very difficult to gain anything from fighting, and they would even put themselves in danger, so it was not very meaningful. But the way people of the 5th ring did things over these tens of thousands of years had more or less been tainted with a trace of the sword vein style. They were used to thinking after doing it, and not thinking after doing it. Was this the right attitude? In fact, the 3 pure ones were well aware of this. Of course, in theory, it was wrong, but in a special environment, in a special era, you could no longer use those principles of being cautious, or else why would you stand out? If you wanted to show your divinity in front of people, you had to suffer behind their backs. Difficulties and dangers were not an excuse. You only had one life, and such opportunities were rare. Even if they had the chance to reincarnate and cultivate in the future, how could they encounter the change of eras? The great Tao changed, rising and falling one after another. In the innate great Tao, it was unknown whether reincarnation would still exist. You might not even have the chance to reincarnate, so you could only fight for the present. Everyone had their own ideas about the innate great Tao, and they were in different directions and fields. She had a unique merit in reincarnation, and she had some innate divine ability. Otherwise, she would not have reincarnated back to Xinyuan again and again. But this time, she felt that after she died, she would never be able to come back. It was not that she could not come back to Xinyuan, but that she would never have the chance to reincarnate and cultivate. This feeling was very idealistic, but she was now at the half-immortal level, so there must be a reason for her sudden impulse. Where was the reason? In reincarnation, she felt that there might be a problem with the innate great Tao of reincarnation. It might not disappear and be pushed down from the position of innate great Tao, but there might be a profound change in this great Tao. The principle of reincarnation would no longer be so inclined to reincarnate and cultivate. This kind of thing could not be discussed with others, except for little Rod Liu. She did not know where he died, and she had not seen him for many years. It was because of this feeling that she knew that time waited for no man, and she had to cut off all means of retreat. Everyone, as long as they were alert enough and had a keen intuition about the future changes in the universe, would choose to fight with their backs against the wall. She looked at the problem from the perspective of reincarnation, and Qing Xian and she looked at the problem from their own fields. The great Tao came from the same source, and although the paths were different, their final goal was the same. This was the three of them complaining and quarreling, but no one would mention the idea of retreating in the face of danger. Not to mention that there were three of them now. Even if there was only one of them, they would not shrink back. The half-immortals were getting closer and closer, and finally, two of the five decay took the first step and disappeared into the fiery nebula. With the beginning, the next step was logical. The old monsters disappeared one by one, quickly and in an orderly manner, as if the main course had been served and the guests could not wait to take their seats. One could feel their eagerness, but they still maintained their poise in their actions. The three of them looked at each other, and without hesitation, they followed closely behind. The originally lively fiery nebula disappeared in an instant, leaving only the eternal heat, as usual. Chapter 21:30. Once they entered the wormhole, they immediately felt the flow of cosmic matter. Although it was still very slow, it was incomparably clear. This is the path of no return. It seems like something is flowing in. We're going down with the flow, but I don't feel any great Tao fragments. She complained as usual. The three of them followed closely behind the old monsters in front and went with the flow. Qing Xian shouted, "Shut up. I know you are very nervous, but isn't it too low-end to use words to mediate the mood? You are a half-immortal, not a half-grown brat. Look at senior sister. She doesn't say anything. This is temperament." Yin and I snorted. Why should I not say anything? Why should I have to put up with your endless **T every day? I thought that without little E, I would be able to have some peace and quiet. But in the end, you two old turtles came. Hey, why do I feel that these old guys don't take us seriously? What if they don't count us in when they divide the fragments? Snatch it by force? She clapped and laughed. Senior sister is mighty. Senior sister is heroic. I also feel that we are treated as outsiders who are here to watch. In the fiery nebula, no one cares about us, but they are whispering among themselves. I think we need a battle to show our strength. The fiery nebula said. Otherwise, if more than 40 old guys think that we don't have the qualifications to participate, then we will be in trouble. Qing Xian was silent. How could she not know the actual situation? There were circles everywhere, and a very important circle in the half-immortal level was these old monsters at the peak of half-immortal level. All of them were more than 10,000 years old and had seen a lot. Before the change of era, you don't allow them to fight with their old lives? The path of no return was the private land of these people. They were dividing the great Tao fragments here, working hard for their last step, for the new innate great Tao. You can't say that this is the era of young monsters, and that the 10,000-year-old monsters are outdated. As long as they are alive now, they belong to this era. To these old half-immortals, they might think that they are the grandfathers of the era. The reason why there were so few young geniuses, only the three of them, was largely because these old fellows had threatened and hinted at them openly or covertly. Little brats, don't come and snatch things from your grandfathers. You won't have a good ending. As the leader of the three, he actually knew more than the other two. Originally, he came with a fluke mentality, but after coming here, he found out that it was more than he imagined. To be honest, they probably didn't have any chance unless the fragments here were extremely abundant. No matter who it was, even if that guy Lu came, he wouldn't have any chance in the encirclement of 30 peak of half-immortals. This was a fact, and they had to admit it. Don't make a move first. Don't give the old guys an excuse. We have to show that we're here to watch the show, to broaden our horizons, and perhaps to pick up some scraps. We will wait. Wait for the great Tao fragments. See the fragments? Quantity? How easy it is. Let's see how the old guys are going to bite each other. My chance will come when they start biting each other. It didn't matter if it was to take the millet out of the fire or to stand on the side of the team. But before that, she, shut your stinky mouth. Senior sister, don't go crazy. She twisted his head. I have a mouth, and I won't regret it even if I die. Yin raised her eyebrows. No matter how sharp my Xianyuan is, no sword won't go crazy. Qing Xian sighed. This trip to the road of no return, they probably wouldn't be able to stop. Following the flow, they felt that the universe's medium was gradually speeding up, as if there was something in front of them that was attracting them. They still didn't see a single fragment of the great Tao, and they just ran wildly on this road of no return. This was the first time the three of them came here, and they didn't have any seniors who had experienced it before to give them pointers. Taking one step at a time was their countermeasure. Of course, no one provoked the old guys in front of them. Although they were stubborn, they knew what was important. Flying like this, the old guys in front didn't stop at all. Their goal was clear, and they just kept going forward. Obviously, they had a card up their sleeve. The three five-ring monsters obediently followed at the back. They tactfully didn't say much, didn't try to overtake them, and didn't cause any trouble. Their cautiousness wasn't without reason. The old guys were actually very disgusted with these three uninvited guests. They'd crossed the line a little. You shouldn't be here, but you came. Are you here to snatch the tonic that your grandfathers need to save their lives? It wasn't easy to make a move in the fire nebula outside, and it would be easy for the news to leak. If word got out that they were bullying the weak, it wouldn't look good. Their plan was to find a reason to kill these three arrogant brats after entering the road of no return. However, the three youngsters behaved properly after entering. They didn't cross the line, and they couldn't find any evidence against them. If these three youngsters could really maintain such a humble attitude, they would be here to broaden their horizons and not participate in the fight. In that case, there was no need to kill them. There were more than 30 old people in their circle here. Would they care about 3 little worms? Everything depended on their own choice. They flew like this for a full 5 months. One could imagine how long this wormhole was. Wouldn't it take a few years for them to completely fly down? The Tao fragment was also absorbed from such a long distance. Chapter 21:31. She would always be the first to speak. 13 fragments of the great Tao. 8 of them are the newest 4 fortunes, and the other 5 are Nirvana, Chaos, Tai, and Tai Chu. Oh, and there's even a Wuchang? That's it. That's not enough to share. Qing Xian sneered. It's best if it's not enough. If it's really enough, we won't even get anything. That was the case in theory, but the truth was there were more benefits and less risks. How could one be sure? Smokey's attention was not on the fragments, but the intestines suddenly shrank like a larynx. The universe's medium here is turbulent, and we can't even maintain our form without using elemental energy. I want to know what's on the other side of the larynx. Will it expand back, or will it just keep shrinking? She was speechless. Senior sister, we're already at this point. Don't be so curious. If you have the time, why don't you think about how we're going to escape after we snatch a few fragments? Which direction should we run to? Who runs first? Who covers? Smokey glanced at him. I just want to know what's on the other side. Is it the void of the universe? Only then can we decide which direction to run to. As for who covers, is there a need to consider? Isn't it one of you two? Don't tell me you two have the nerve to run first and leave me, a weak woman, to cover for you? She was speechless. You're weak? Then who's strong? But this was true. It seemed like only the 2 of them could stop them from behind. This had nothing to do with gender, but the specialty of Dharma Meridians was that they dug traps as they ran. Swordsman should be the one in front. Qing Xian could not help but say, "Stop guessing. That side is longer than here. The exit is in the ice crystal world, Phoenix's nest. So if we really want to run, we can only turn back and run." This news came as a surprise to the other two. She was surprised. Phoenix's nest? This creature is extremely cold. I've cultivated for 3,000 years, but I've never seen a phoenix. Since it's on the way, this is a rare opportunity. Why don't we go from there? Smokey was also looking forward to it. I heard that phoenixes are noble and self-restrained, and are not confused by anything in the world. I really want to see if I can make friends with them. She was completely curious about beautiful creatures. This was the nature of Kuin-Shio. Furthermore, Li Wuya's grandson was once on good terms with the phoenix. She had reincarnated a few times and was very clear about this. She was confident that Phoenix would definitely stand on her side if they really came into contact with each other. However, it was hard to say if they could become friends. Logically speaking, if Li Wuya could gain Phoenix's friendship, why couldn't she? But then again, what if phoenixes liked rough ones? It was obvious that Qing Xian knew more than them. This came from the long history of the three pristine orthodoxy. It seemed like they were just looking, passing by, going over there. They looked like they were busy and did not want to disturb them. But no one knew that the three young beasts were just hiding their claws and teeth deeply, waiting for the moment to reveal themselves. No one answered them and let them talk among themselves. But at the same time, no one did anything to them. It was a critical moment now, and everyone was arguing with each other. The three of them slipped away. Shishi sighed again. I, Shishi, have lived for 3,000 years and fought countless battles. I don't dare to say that I won all of them, but I have never been afraid of anything. I only walk on the main road and not the small path. I am upright and upright. Only others hide from me. When have I ever hidden from others? Why is it that the more I mix, the more I go backward? Now I actually choose to slip away? If this spreads out, do you still want your little face? Yin Cheng was impatient. Then you go on a main road. No one is stopping you. I like to slip away. Shishi smiled. Forget it. I'll accompany you guys. Who asked me to be so kind? The three of them slipped away. The throat was very short, and they passed through it in less than a minute. They felt that the front and back of the throat were two completely different worlds. One was as warm as summer, and the other was as cold as ice. The instant difference in temperature was so great that they had to use their elemental force to resist. On the other side of the throat, it was a completely different scene. The flow of matter in the universe was extremely fast, and the temperature was extremely low. The wonders of the sky were vividly reflected. Shishi's eyes were sharp. He suddenly pointed to the front. That was the direction of the jet. Look over there. There are 5 more cultivators approaching. Did they come in from the other side of the road of no return? The three of them looked over. Indeed, there were 5 points of light. They were moving against the flow and were getting closer and closer. Qing Xian sighed. The phoenix is coming. Chapter 2132. It was the first time for the three of them to see a phoenix. Under their gazes, the 5 lights gradually appeared. From one point, they could see the shape. It was shocking. 2 at the front and 3 at the back. The formation was neat. They flapped their wings. The frequency was not fast, but it was elegant. Even in such a strong cosmic jet, their feathers were not messed up. Their crowns flew like halberds. From afar, they could vaguely feel the aura of a king. The 5 phoenixes were all in the half-immortal realm. They were majestic, but if one looked carefully, the coordination between the wings and tail of the one at the back of the 5 phoenixes was a little strange. However, this was a little secret that could only be discovered between phoenixes. In the eyes of others, there was basically no difference at all. Perhaps this phoenix's mole was acting up? It's so beautiful. The king of all beasts. It deserves its reputation. Yin Chen could not take his eyes off it. It was not that he was infatuated, but phoenixes were really amazing creatures. Their noble birth, cold character, and strong strength had always been the so-called role model of the righteous. Shishi was also fascinated. This guy, whoever is lucky enough to have such a ride. Oh no, friend. He doesn't even need to pretend to be a friend. He will definitely shock everyone as soon as he appears. Who else but me? Unfortunately, for millions of years, it seems that no one can ride a phoenix. Qing Xian was still quiet. The first two phoenixes are at the peak of half immortal. The last three phoenixes are at the first step of half immortal. Unfortunately, if it's one-on-one, I'm afraid we don't even have the ability to deal with one. Shishi retorted, Ma Bai Lu, did you eat too much gunpowder? Why do you always want to fight, just like little stick Lu? We can also be friends. Think about it. A phoenix is a friend? It's inspiring to talk about it. And I'll gain face if I lead it out. The aura of a phoenix was indeed meaningless to humans. But psychologically, it was more or less still a little bit. It depended on whether the cultivator's state of mind was firm. The three of them stood at the side as if they were watching a ceremony. They did not realize that their position was a little awkward. They were like subordinates welcoming the emperor. Gradually, the five phoenixes were getting closer and closer. They were so close that they could clearly recognize the gorgeous feathers on their bodies. That was truly the work of the gods. Every single one of them was compatible with a certain color, emitting a dazzling radiance amidst the seven colors. Light and shadow intertwined, dazzling the eyes. Of the two at the front, one was fiery red, and the other was cyan. The three at the back, from the nearest to the furthest, had purple, blue, and the last one was multicolored. He had heard of streaky pork and luwak chicken, but he had never heard of a mixed-feathered phoenix. But it was still a phoenix. Real feathers, thick auras, and mysterious instincts. The world was vast and full of wonders. For a species like the phoenix that had not appeared in the origin world for tens of thousands of years, humans knew very little about it. It wasn't strange. Shishi's mouth was the cheapest. He whispered to his friend beside him, among the five, I think the green one is the most beautiful, followed by the purple one, followed by the fiery red one, then the sky blue one. The five-colored one is slightly worse. There was a slight poof sound in the air. Everyone did not pay attention to it, but Smoke Puppet had a different opinion. I think the purple one is the most beautiful, followed by the sky blue one, then the purple one, then the cyan one, and finally the five-colored one. Shishi, you are colorblind. How could you know what is beautiful? The flock of phoenixes streaked across the sky not far from them. They did not even look at them, as if they did not exist in their field of vision. They flew straight to the throat. In the cultivation world, everyone was a cultivation creature, so ignoring them like this was actually very rude. But if it was the phoenixes, it did not matter, because they had been like this for millions of years. No matter who it was, they would not be angry, nor would they be happy. Their cold temperament had never changed, so no one cared about their disregard. But before Smoke Puppet's voice fell, there seemed to be another poof sound. This time, everyone heard it clearly. In just a few short breaths, the flock of phoenixes entered the throat. Their target was obviously those old human cultivators. On the cold side of the throat, there were only 3 young half-immortals left. It was still Shishi. If I said that I heard someone farting just now, would it be my imagination? Smoke Puppet glared at him. You have to be careful when you joke. That could also be the sound of turbulent air explosion. Do phoenixes know how to fart? They don't eat grains, and there is no impure air in their body. How can they release chi? If you insist that it was the sound of farting, I would rather suspect that it was you. Qing Xian did not participate in their nonsense. Let's go back. We're just wasting time here. Let's go and see what the old guys are up to. Let's see if we can fan the flames a little and ignite the fire. The 3 of them went back, but Shishi was still not convinced. That was indeed the sound of farting. Could it be that after 3,000 years of cultivation, I can't even distinguish the sound of farting? So what if we don't eat grains? Can't we fart? We don't eat grains too, but there are people among us who like to fart. They call it training their sphincter muscles. That's little Rod Lu. The 3 of them went back the way they came and followed behind the flock of phoenixes. They wanted to see if they could find any opportunities. 31 old monsters at the peak of demi-immortal could not be dealt with on impulse. Confidence was confidence, but there must be a limit. The appearance of the 5 phoenixes and the 3 young demi-immortals did not attract the attention of the old guys. They had been here many times and knew that the phoenixes would appear whenever they were fighting for the Tao fragments in the road of no return. It was not for the fragments, but to prevent the destruction of the wormhole wall in the road of no return. The wormhole had existed for a long time, so long that even the phoenixes had forgotten when it appeared. They were already used to the life and cultivation in the ice crystal world. They did not want to change their way of life, so they were very concerned about the ancient wormhole, even if humans did not care about it. Madame 11 stopped not far away from the space where the old demi-immortals gathered and cried out. The phoenixes are here, and the rules are still the same. Fellow Taoists, you can collect the fragments as you wish. But there is one thing. If you damage the wormhole wall in the fight, you will be destroying the nest of the phoenixes, and you will be the enemy of my phoenixes. She had said this sentence many times. The phoenixes did not know how to use soft words to negotiate. This was their characteristic. Their cold tone and cold attitude were not deliberately targeted at anyone or any race. The human cultivators basically understood this point, but it did not mean that everyone could calmly accept this kind of way of speaking. Previously, when they were maintaining order, because the Tao fragments only dropped one by one, the number of peak demi-immortal cultivators who came here was relatively small, only a dozen or so people. When a dozen or so demi-immortals encountered 4 or 5 phoenixes, their strength was almost the same. The phoenixes even had an advantage because they were stronger. Therefore, no matter how cold the words were, they could still listen to them. But now, there were a total of 31 human demi-immortals, and their strength far surpassed the phoenixes. There were some proud and arrogant demi-immortals who felt uncomfortable listening to them. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.